Chapter 1. The window of my office didn't exactly afford the most picturesque view in the city. There was the liquor store, a cliché perhaps, but there it was, a few houses with boarded-up windows that looked like they'd been squeezed in, jostling for space, and the steps leading down to the subway. It might not have been pretty, but it was pretty typical of the district. Could have been any corner in the city, nothing about it to indicate anything special. But if I tipped my chair back so my eye line shifted a little higher to the rooftops, then there, silhouetted against the slate-gray sky, I would see the sentinel. To the casual observer, the figure would have just looked like a man standing on the top of the building, perhaps enjoying the view, bird-watching, or contemplating suicide, all popular pursuits in this area of town. But to those who knew the importance of the street, the man's presence took on new meaning. I knew that he had been there now for 4 hours, barely moving, his gaze relentlessly scanning the scene beneath. I knew that when he did finally leave, he would be replaced by someone else. That building would always have a sentinel on it because the street marked the edge of Kenai territory. Beyond that, it was no man's land for about a block and a half, then you were in Arctic territory. Humans crossed these invisible boundaries every day, back and forth between territories without even thinking, without even knowing there was anything there. But to a werewolf, such boundaries were as uncrossable as the Berlin Wall back in the day, and those who crossed without permission did so at risk of their lives. I was not a werewolf, nor, strictly speaking, was I human. Courtesy of my grandmother, I was 1/4 werewolf. I remembered my gran as a kindly old lady, smelling faintly of lavender, who had an apparently inexhaustible supply of hard candy secreted in the various pockets of her cardigan, and who occasionally turned into a wolf. As a child, I found these changes hilarious. As a teen, I found them embarrassing. As an adult, I just missed my gran, regardless of her shape. At no point did I find it weird. I myself didn't turn even at full moon, though it could make me a little angsty, and I lost more boyfriends that night than any other. But my heritage gave me a certain affinity with the creatures without being one of them or having to pledge allegiance to one of the 4 packs that shared the city. I could smell where the boundaries between the pack territories were, but I didn't have to stick to them and could cross with impunity. Best of both worlds. Or a failure to fit into either. Certainly, humans looked at me differently when they found out about my ancestry, wondering if I might tear their throat out for fun, while werewolves could smell the mix of wolf and human on me and didn't like or trust it. Perhaps that feeling of not belonging in either world was what led me to becoming a private investigator, a job that attracted the loners of the world. People rank private eyes and part wolves about on a par on the scale of general mistrust, and as long as I was already being mistrusted by both factions of society, I figured I might as well make some money out of it. Besides, I liked puzzles and got off on solving them. As far as I knew, I was the only part wolf investigator in the city, a position of distinction that made people avoid me like the plague until the wires got crossed in the simple, segregated circuits of their lives. Humans and werewolves didn't mix much socially, but shit happens, and when it did, I was there to pick up the pieces. All of that, I guess, was why Kenai King came to me. I heard the door open in my outer office and went to see who was there. Recent financial complications had left me without a secretary. I opened the door and stood, wide-eyed like an idiot, staring at my 3 visitors. 2 of them would have made anybody stare. They were massive slabs of muscle, their bald heads almost reaching the ceiling, their low brows advertising equally low intelligence, their oversized bodies stuffed into ill-fitting suits. But it was the 3rd, less immediately arresting man who had stopped me in my tracks. Miss Malone. The silver-haired man smiled, showing his sharp canine teeth. The last person I expected to find in my office first thing on a Monday morning was the most powerful werewolf in the city, perhaps in the country. Pack leader, I replied, showing my knowledge by using his proper title. What can I do for you? Pack leader Kenai King's unsettling grin remained on his face as he answered. Someone is trying to kill me. I'd like you to find out who. For werewolf packs made their territories in the city, and while you could not put all of them in order of supremacy, the Kenai were undoubtedly top of the pile. Since the time of King's grandfather, the Kenai pack had held the center of the city, all the best areas and most expensive real estate. The boundaries might fluctuate through skirmishes and minor wars, but for now, at least, the Kenai seemed immovable and invincible, and Kenai King was known as a ruthless leader. King turned to his vast bodyguards. Stay here. He then strode past me, leading me back into my own office with the confident air of one who has been the most important person in every room he walks into his entire life. I followed, closing the door behind me. With respect, pack leader, aren't people trying to kill you part of your job description? King nodded. That is true. But this is different. Closer to home. Perhaps you'd better tell me the whole story. King sat down with athletic elegance. He moved with the animal grace that so many werewolves strived for and achieved with varying degrees of success. He was in his 60s now, but still in good condition and still a very handsome man for his age. If you like that kind of thing, I got over my daddy issues some years ago. Last week was the lunar hunt. Every full moon, werewolves gather for a state-sanctioned hunt. One of the agreements reached in the general amnesty, which had first allowed werewolves to live among humans as equal citizens, was that hunting was a cultural tradition and could not be completely outlawed. That said, hunting a human at any time, as wolves had pre-1917, was obviously not compatible with being a worthwhile part of society, so a compromise had been reached. The werewolves would be given one night a month, the night of the full moon, when they could hunt as a pack with impunity. More than that, packs would be given the names and details of certain people that the state could well do without for them to hunt. These people were usually rapists, child molesters and the like, whom the police had either been unable to catch or whom they knew to be guilty, but lacked the evidence to convict. Evading the nose of a wolf was not so easy. There had initially been some opposition and some protests that, as punishments went, this one was probably cruel and definitely unusual, but the voices of defense for such people were never very loud, and when the number of such crimes began to drop as criminals responded to the new and terrible penalty for their actions, even those few voices were silenced. By now, the lunar hunt was viewed as an essential part of a civilized society, and people wondered how we ever managed without it. It is one of the few times, King continued, when I can get away from my bodyguards. In the heat of the hunt, anything goes. People forget themselves. We were chasing the prey through the alleys not far from our heartland. Though they hold large territories, most packs have one particular area that they identify as home. I was leading the chase naturally, and we caught up to him on one of the side streets. As the pack was descending on him, I felt someone grab my collar and pull me back. Now, when the hunt ends, it's a bit of free-for-all. Everyone jostling to get their pound of flesh, and a young wolf might not look too hard at who he's got hold of. I just assumed that some overeager pup had grabbed me by the scruff without looking, not knowing who I was. So I turned around to put him in his place. Kenai King paused in his story. He untucked his shirt from the waistband of his pants to lift it, twisting his body slightly to show me a bandage stuck across his side. If I hadn't been so quick to turn, the knife would have gone into my back and I might not be here talking to you. Did you get a look at the guy? I asked. King snorted. If I got a look at him, we'd have taken care of this ourselves. He turned as I moved, keeping out of sight as he stuck the knife in. A knife? He spat contemptuously. What sort of weapon is that for a wolf? I lashed back at him, claws out, but I just caught the palm of his hand. Drew blood. Though. He ran, I guess. By that point he knew he'd fucked the whole thing up, so he took to his paws. I yelled for the rest of the pack. What had they been doing up to now? I wondered. Feeding, said King bluntly. At the end of a hunt, a bomb going off wouldn't distract a wolf from the kill. It was the perfect time for an assassination attempt. All this was interesting but not unusual. To attain their lofty position in the city, the Kenai had made enemies in all the other packs, and while King had inherited a large territory, he had not been shy about enlarging it over the years whenever an opportunity presented itself. A street here, warehouse there. Anything ill-defended fell prey to the ruthless expansionist outlook of the Kenai pack leader. That sort of attitude did not make you friends. It also meant that the Kenai territory was a rich treasure for any pack leader with the balls to try and take it, and the first step to that would be killing King. But that sort of intrigue was the everyday life of werewolves. King had held the Arctic, Hawkeye or Mackenzie packs responsible, then he would have responded with border raids, taking revenge in blood. He certainly wouldn't be consulting a down-at-heel private investigator, who was only a part wolf. A week after the event, something more was going on here. The pack gave chase, King went on, his voice changing slightly as he spoke, subtly hardening. I was regrettably incapacitated by my wound, but my personal guard and my court went after the assassin. He was bleeding from the wound I gave him, so following him was no problem for any werewolf. He left a trail. Even you could probably have followed. I ignored the subtle insult. Where did it lead? King's ice blue eyes flicked away from me for a moment, as if he was wondering if coming here and sharing this with an outsider had been such a good idea. You must be wondering why I came to you. I'm thinking you're about to tell me. Those guards out in your office, they are far from the best of my protectors. They are the most stupid. They dumbly do as they are told without any question. Dumb loyalty is sometimes the best kind. They don't have the intelligence for self-interest. I leaned back in my chair, feeling for the first time as if the balance of power had shifted in my favor, even if I wasn't quite sure why. Pack leader. If you have something to say, then perhaps you had better just say it. King's eyes found me again. The trail led to Air's house. There it ended. The trail led to my son's. That explained it. If King were to die, then by natural werewolf law one of his sons, usually though not always the eldest, would take his place as pack leader. There had been cases of sons getting a bit impatient and hastening that day, and there had been cases of sons effecting a coup when a pack leader seemed weak. But if any of his sons had been planning to oust King, then they could not do it alone. They would need the support of members of the pack court. If King suspected his sons, then he also had to suspect his own closest allies. He could trust no one in his own pack. So he had come to me, and based on the fact that it had taken him a week to do it, he was not happy about the necessity. Either that or I just hadn't been his first choice. The relationship between myself and my sons, King continued, is not a close one. I had heard. It was common knowledge in the werewolf community, and I tried to keep up with all the gossip. Perhaps you have not heard to what extent matters have deteriorated, King went on. 2 weeks ago, I threatened to disinherit all 3 of them. He pulled a smile that was closer to a snarl. Perhaps I should have gone through with it. Then they would have had no cause to kill me. More likely, if you had actually disinherited them, they would have come after you by more direct means, I suggested. King nodded. Perhaps. But I would have preferred that. To see one of those wastes of space actually winning support for himself, raising an army to take me down. Better yet, challenging me to single combat. To see that would have been worth dying for. At least I would die knowing I had sons who were worth a shit. But a paid assassin sticking a knife in my back. He shook his head. I suppose it's all I would have expected of them, but for a Kenai to stoop to such depths is a sad sight indeed. Do you have any idea which of them might be responsible? I asked. King shifted in his seat, uncomfortable talking about the inadequacies of his bloodline. Tanner would be the most likely to take action, and I pride myself he does at least have a little of his father in him, but he's rash and hot-headed. Last year he nearly bit the head off an old friend of mine just because he complimented the female Tanner was with. I was tempted to ask what complimented meant in this context, but let King go on. You can't rule a pack with that sort of thin skin and quick temper. He'd undo all I've achieved in a matter of months, but that same attitude makes me think he wouldn't hire a killer. No, give Tanner his due, he doesn't back away from a fight, doesn't hide in the shadows. King shook his head. Gray is another matter. Always alone, sullen. Certainly always looks like he's plotting something. Then there was that female of his, quite inappropriate, and I told him so, and he's hated me ever since. Yes, the others may dislike me, but Gray's the one who hates me, and not with a clean, pure anger. He keeps it bottled up. If I had to put money on it. But even as he spoke, his mind seemed to change. Then again, I think he wants to be pack leader the least. Has no time for it. Not like Hudson. Power hungry, I suggested. But King scoffed. I wish. No, he would enjoy the financial freedom of it. He likes to play. Women, gambling, you name it. Human women too. Don't misunderstand me. Young male should have his time in the sun, make a few mistakes, sow a few wild oats, anger a few fathers. I certainly did. He chuckled at the memory of his younger days. But Hudson is a wastrel, pure and simple, and shows no sign of growing out of it. I cut him off financially last year in hopes of him calming down some. I think he'd like to be pack leader just to get hold of the purse strings, and then we'll see the wine flow. The Emperor Nero would have nothing on pack leader Hudson fiddling while the Kenai territory burns before him. He paused again. But with the money comes responsibility. And a scoundrel though he is, Hudson knows that it wouldn't be fun all the time and that he'd have a target on his back. He may want the money, but I'm not sure he wants it quite that badly. King ran a frustrated hand through his silver hair. Not a one of them is fit to be pack leader, and to a wolf they hate me. But to pick one who would dare to take that final step. He shook his head. Perhaps they all did it together. That way Tanner would get power, Gray his revenge, and Hudson his money. But I'm not sure I can see them working together like that either. He growled under his breath, his wolfishness coming to the surface. I just don't know, damn it. One of them, two of them, all of them. The guilt lies somewhere in Ayer's house. And I'd like you to find out where. Obviously I was going to take the case. Getting mixed up in werewolf politics is dangerous as hell and a good way to make enemies. When a werewolf uses the phrase enemy for life, they meant until they killed you. On the counter side, the Kenai pack was extremely wealthy and King was offering me a blank check. But neither of these arguments against or for really entered into the decision for me. Frankly, I would take the case because it was a mystery and I never could turn away from a good mystery. It was a change from the usual interspecies squabbling and human husbands thinking their wife has gone for a bit of tail. As they say, that made up my day-to-day caseload. But above all that, it was the chance to enter into the world of the packs. I strolled through werewolf territory with more awareness than the average human, and through my gran I had been a bit more involved in werewolf life, but the secret inner workings of the packs I knew only secondhand. This was not a world into which humans, or part wolves, were often invited. I couldn't pass the opportunity up. To King, my acceptance of the case seemed to be a formality. It had never occurred to him that I might say no. On Friday night I am hosting a gala at the Pack Lodge to welcome my new mate. You will come along to get a closer look at my sons as well as another assurance of my safety. Can't be too careful now. He was probably right. He couldn't even trust his bodyguards anymore. Werewolf loyalty tended to be to the pack itself rather than the pack leader. And Tanner, Gray or Hudson might well win support as younger, more energetic leaders, or by good old-fashioned bribery. I'll be there, I nodded. I just said you would. Kenai King did not request obedience. He assumed it, and he got it. He sent a glance over me from top to bottom and cocked his head. Dress well. This is a formal event. I'll check my wardrobe. The werewolf shook his head, took out a wallet made from a skin that I decided not to look too closely at, and handed me a bundle of notes. Don't skimp. Chapter 2. Little as I liked King dictating my wardrobe, and as tempting as it was to pocket the cash which I definitely needed, I wound up going shopping and found a dress that looked the part but didn't restrict my movement. I had no reason to think things might get physical, but with werewolves you never knew for sure, and the last thing I needed was a long dress for me to trip over or a tight dress I couldn't run in. I went medium length and loose enough for movement, but it was clear from the moment I arrived at the Pack Lodge that I was the only woman there who had worried about movement when picking what to wear. Werewolves are raw, violent animals, and to counter that roughness they go glam in a serious way when the event calls for it. The place was a sea of colors: blood red, emerald green, azure blue, all sparkling in the bright lights of the foyer. There were long trailing dresses that could surely only be worn once, and narrow dresses split to the hip, showing a wide swath of smooth skin. There were dresses so short that they required readjustment every few steps, and sitting down in them would give an eyeful of goodies to anyone seated, and plunging necklines that revealed a canyon of skin between twin peaks of carefully separated breast, contrasting with powerful underwires that subtly thrust bosoms up and together, creating a cleavage you could ski down. There were backless dresses, strapless dresses, and dresses that seemed to consist of little more than a few strips of fabric glued on to cover strategic areas. The heels were high, the hair was huge, and the jewelry could have been sold to pay off third world debt. To be honest, I didn't look that closely because it was making me second guess my choice of dresses, and because there were other places to look. Human men on such an occasion tend to make less of an effort, just throw on a rented tux and they're done. But werewolf males like to preen almost as much. as the females. Some of the open shirts had more plunging necklines than the women, showing off chests that were hairy or waxed, muscular or plump. No one seemed to care much in this world. The pants were tight enough that a doctor could have diagnosed through them. They wore as broad and bright an array of colors as the females and strutted proudly about, sizing each other up. A lot of these parties ended in violence, but it was usually all in good fun. Name? The plainly dressed man on the door asked. Lana Malone. But before the words were out of my mouth, he was already frowning. He had caught my scent and knew what I was. The pack leader requested my presence. The man ran an eye down his list to find my name. Got ID. I reached into the little clutch purse I had brought. I might as well get used to this now. I was going to be getting funny looks all night long. The man checked my ID, checked his list again, then ID, list me, ID, before finally admitting me with a curt jerk of his head. He clearly thought standards at these parties were slipping. I made my way through the throng, overwhelmed with the smell of werewolf. Had never been in a room with so many of them, and it was intoxicating. Something primal inside me, something that the genetic material of all my human ancestors was unable to fight, uncurled and growled. It would be too much to say that I felt at home, but I felt hot. I had never slept with a werewolf. It had always struck me as dangerous, and right now a part of me that I had always denied was raising its head and howling at the moon. It was not helped by the fact that I had not slept with anyone in the last 6 months. The last guy dumped me when he found out what I was. By text, no less. Spineless prick. People got nervous when they found out the truth. I've always had a healthy sex drive, but it's often butted up against my basic belief that sex is best between two people who love each other. Finding love for a part wolf is difficult, and so I spend a lot of time suppressing that drive and just letting it out every once in a while when I've had too much to drink and need to get laid or explode. Around humans I could pretty much cope going without. I got a bit frisky from time to time, but who didn't? Around wolves, however, it was a different matter. Wolves use pheromones far more than humans, and there was something in the air in that room that was like breathing in sexual desire. Suddenly 6 months was seeming like even longer than it was, and definitely longer than I could bear. I wanted to jump every man in the room right then and there. More than that, my body knew that this was something that it not just wanted, but that it had never had, and that forever unfulfilled need for werewolf sex gnawed at my nerves. I grabbed a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter and slugged back. I had to control myself and remember why I was here. Fortunately, pretty much the only thing I like more than great sex is a mystery. I love my work, and this was the most important case of my career. Tonight, even with my hormones going nuts, I could keep myself in check. Tomorrow I was going to bar and taking home the first man who smiled at me. Friends. The powerful voice of Kenai King soared above the hubbub of the room. He threw back his head and let loose an impressive howl that echoed about the rafters. As one, the rest of the room answered him, all howling loud enough to shake the pack lodge. I wondered if I was supposed to join in, or if that would be cultural appropriation. Tonight is a special night, King continued, once the last echoes had died away. Tonight, I welcome a new mate to my harem. In some respects, werewolves have a very open attitude towards sexual relationships. A male can have as many partners as he can handle, and they are all considered his mates. Perhaps more surprisingly, it's the same deal with females. They can have multiple mates to their heart's content, and looking around the room I could see a few females, particularly the more mature ones, with 4 or 5 males around them, all chatting companionably. It was not seen as a problem or anything to be jealous about. The only caveat was that you didn't mate with another wolf's mate without him knowing, or at least you told him afterwards as soon as possible. Affairs where secrecy was involved were settled by bloody duels, which the law had found a way to ignore. Welcome Shelby Maria, and know her now and henceforth as Kenai Maria. As the howl was taken up to welcome King's new bride. Bride is not technically the right term, but the truth is more complicated. A female walked forward to join King at the front of the dais. She couldn't have been more than 21, long and lean with hair dark brown and smooth bronze skin. She wore a green dress that looked to have been painted onto her and revealed as much of her body as possible. I was relieved to note that she looked happy enough to be there, her cherry red lips framing a brilliant white smile, fangs glinting in the light. Kenai King might be 3 times her age, but he was a powerful male, which mattered a lot in this world, and, as I had noted when he visited my office, he was handsome and exuded a charismatic sexuality. Kenai King wasn't my type. Perhaps there's still too much human in me to overlook the age difference and basic nastiness of his nature, but that sort of thing can still be hard to resist. The thought was on my mind as my gaze went beyond the happy couple to the Kenai court arrayed behind. Here stood King's closest advisors, his other 3 mates, and his sons, Tanner, Gray, and Hudson. Perhaps it was the mood I had been put in by the unexpectedly charged atmosphere of the Pack Lodge Hall, and my first encounter with the sharp ferocity of werewolf sexuality when they gathered en masse, but when I saw the 3 brothers it felt like my libido skipped a beat. They certainly had their father's air of authority, the strong features and rugged good looks, the easy charisma and a virility that seems almost like a physical thing projected from them. Yet, to my eyes at least, they seemed to lack his smug confidence in all those aspects. They simply were who they were and how they were, taking no pride in their obvious superiority to every other male in the room. Male was the word I found branded on my brain, though they were all very different. They all seemed supremely masculine. The one in a russet military-style jacket, buttoned across his broad chest, I recognized as Tanner, the eldest son, standing closest to his father, though still not all that close. He was tall with black hair and stern features that seemed to preclude what his father had said about him, were it not for the eyes that stared out from beneath his heavy brow. The eyes were as dark as his hair, and a fire burned within them as they flashed almost angrily about the room. Everything about Tanner seemed to speak of someone keeping themselves in check. He was like a coiled spring, ready for action, ready to explode, ready for anything, and able to handle anything as well. As I edged closer through the crowd to get a better look, I saw him move and couldn't help admiring the power in his physique. Something as simple as walking a few steps looked like an athletic event when Tanner did it. His clothes were cut snugly enough that I could see the muscularity of his body. I could sense still more of it, and the combination of the two made me want to see the rest firsthand. Beside Tanner, his face morose, his eyes half closed, stood middle child, Gray. I wondered if he had been named for the color of his eyes, which, even at this remove, I could see were slate with just a hint of blue, like a stormy sky at sea. His brown hair was neatly trimmed and his head hung heavy as the party continued around him. Despite the vivid green jacket he wore, emblazoned with gold piping and epaulets, he looked like he was the only one here who was at a funeral. His hands were clasped in front of him, and as I looked I saw they were clasped tightly enough to make the veins pop and the knuckles stand out white. They were unusually long hands, sensitive and artistic, for all their obvious strength and the roughness of them, like a sculptor's hands. My mind leaped, without my permission, into vivid wondering at what they might feel like roving across my helpless body. In contrast to the dark energy of his brothers, Hudson seemed to shine. His butter-yellow waistcoat, offset by the brilliantly white shirt, certainly helped, as he looked like a beacon. The light, playful clothing choice did little to disguise the impressive physique beneath. Hudson's body was as strong and beautiful as his face, which was saying something. But there was also a brightness to Hudson in general. His golden curls were like a halo of vivid gold. His smile was quick and wicked enough that my nipples peaked instantly at the sight of it. While Gray stood stock still and Tanner walked with deliberate strength, Hudson was never still, the energy that fired through him seeming to need a constant outlet that made him seem to prowl about, vibrating with attention. That moved me. A lot of that energy was sexual. His tight pants were practically an advertisement, and his sharp blue eyes were as active as the rest of him, ever on the move, passing from woman to woman and seeming to like everything he found. I had heard the stories about Kenai Hudson and knew that there was no way he would be going home alone tonight. The thought both irritated and intrigued me, and I had to shake off my undue focus on the appearances of the 3 compelling males and remember my purpose. Those were my targets. One of the 3 men I had just been undressing with my eyes had tried to kill his father and would no doubt try again. This was not how I usually started an investigation, but you play the hand you're dealt, and there was no point pretending that these men were anything other than incredible. I caught Kenai King's eye. He had been watching me and had no doubt seen my appraisal of his sons. Fortunately, from the look on his face, he assumed that my interest in them was purely professional and I was just doing my job, the job he had given me. By checking them out, men like Kenai King always consider themselves to be the only attractive male in any given room, and never even allow the possibility that a woman might be looking at someone else. Lucky for me. To Kenai King and Maria, a call went up from some eager sycophant and the toast was repeated around the hall, augmented by howls as it went. But the brothers, I noticed, stayed silent. Could it be all of them? Conspiring against their father? To the pack leader and his mate. Another toast. If the brothers were working together, then that alliance would not last and there would be more blood to come. That type didn't like to share. To the future of the Kenai line. As this toast was called out, hinting at the possibility of more children for the virile pack leader via his fertile new mate, I saw Kenai Tanner turn on his heel and march off the stage, heading for the exit. I only took a moment to think. Here King was surrounded by friends, well, wishers and bodyguards. It was possible they were all against him, but if they were, then there was damn all that I could do about it. I was an investigator, not a bodyguard. Better to leave the party and see where Tanner was going. Even if he disliked his father as much as King thought, it was odd for him to leave like that at a time when his inheritance was at stake and he might have been better off ingratiating himself. Nerves making my hands slick with sweat, I slipped out in pursuit of the eldest of the Kenai. Chapter 3. By the time he had crossed the room and left the pack lodge, Kenai Tanner had picked up a quartet of men, so bulky as to be almost square. It looked to me like Tanner was powerful enough to take care of himself, but the heir to the Kenai pack did not go anywhere without bodyguards in tow. He was a target for other packs who might kidnap him and hold him to ransom or just kill him to expose the weakness of the Kenai, and presumably cause his father some modicum of grief. The enmity between the packs had grown under King, a man with his grandfather's taste for expansion and a bloodlust that was all his own. King could not have seen the point in peace if Mahatma Gandhi had sat down and explained it to him point by point. It gained a pack leader nothing. It meant that his heirs, for as long as they remained his heirs, were targets, but it also meant that other packs were probably too scared to take them for fear of King's retribution. I clung to the shadows as Tanner and his guards headed away from the lodge in the direction of Heir's house. Surreptitiously following humans is tricky. Surreptitiously following werewolves with their superior hearing and sense of smell is a fucking nightmare. I had already slipped off my heels to prevent their loud clacking on the ground from giving me away, but deep in werewolf territory, the smell of a part wolf stood out like a sore thumb. I was forced, therefore, to follow at extreme distance and with extreme care. My new dress didn't help much either. I had chosen something in midnight blue in case of this eventuality, but still, the girl in the ball gown does not blend in. Hanging back at a corner, I watched the little group come to a stop. Tanner seemed to be having some discussion with his bodyguards, his gestures firm and authoritative. Reluctantly, but unable to disobey, the guards left him, going their own way while Tanner walked on, no longer towards Heir's house. This was just getting odder. Leaving the party had been odd, dismissing the guards more so, and now where the hell was he going? I set off again in pursuit, trying to maintain the balance between surveillance and not being seen. I unfolded a map of the city in my mind, trying to figure out where Tanner might be heading, but nowhere obvious sprung to mind. He seemed to be going into the most unobserved areas of Kenai territory, those places you didn't go without a gun loaded with silver bullets. The streets narrowed to lanes and Tanner began to cut between the buildings using the still narrower alleyways. Tracking him through this rat's nest became harder and harder, and I was forced to get closer and move faster. I waited for him to reach the end of the alley, and then ran along it as fast as I could to get a glimpse of where he had gone next. It was the only way, but sooner or later, I seemed doomed to lose him, which made it no less frustrating when it finally happened. Reaching the end of the latest alley, I peered out cautiously but saw no sign of my quarry. I had lost him, and looking for him around here was likely to wind me up in a world of shit. I pulled my shoes back on to head back, when a growl reverberated from behind me. I spun about to find Tanner behind me, but now changed. His handsome face was covered in black fur, his jaw thrust forward in an almost snout displaying his prominent fangs. The sleeves of his shirt had split where his arms had broadened, and thick, coarse hair burst through the splits while the buttons had popped off to display the broad hairy chest of the werewolf. He snapped a threatening snarl at me. I belted him across the face with my clutch, hard enough to make his head turn. I think he was expecting a different reaction from the frightened girl all on her own, but I've been dealing with werewolves my whole life and I know the first key to fighting them is to let them know you're not scared. As Tanner's head turned back to face me, it became human again, shifting seamlessly from form to form. Come here. He made a grab for my arm, catching my wrist. I twisted, surprising him again with my strength. I stamped on his foot, bare from when he had changed, and he cried out in pain but didn't let go of me, flinging me back against the wall of the alley I had just come out of and pressing me there, his hard body up against mine. Feisty little one, aren't you? You've no idea. Perhaps it was wrong, but even in this situation the feel of him against me sent a thrill of desire coursing through me, which didn't stop me from biting his knuckle as hard as I could until he let one of my hands go with a grunt, moving like lightning and thanking God I had chosen the loose dress for easy movement. I twisted a leg around his and sent him tumbling to the ground with me on top of him. I didn't stay there long. He flipped me onto my back with easy strength, trying to pin me to the ground, but I again used his strength and size against him, those judo classes paying off. We rolled over and back again on the ground, each fighting for supremacy, his strength dominating me, my skill outfoxing him. I fought with werewolves all my professional life, and there are a few tricks you can use to put them out of commission before running as fast as you can, because bottom line is they can turn wolf and tear you apart. But he hadn't turned, and I hadn't run. Maybe this was a game that neither of us was keen to end. Finally I got a hand free while I was on top of him and leaning back from him. I delivered a sharp slap to his handsome face. He stopped fighting back, just lying on the ground beneath me. This would normally have been where I ran, but instead I stared down at him. He put out his tongue to touch it to where I had cut his lip, tasting the blood. That wasn't very nice. Well, neither is creeping up on someone you were following me. In this part of town, that's not a wise thing to do. Especially after. He trailed off, clearly about to mention the recent assassination attempt on his father. I didn't want him thinking I was investigating him, but him thinking I was there to murder him was even less ideal if I was hoping to make it out of this encounter alive. I swallowed hard as I racked my brain to come up with an innocent-sounding excuse that would also be believable. I decided to play it coy and appeal to his vanity. Haven't you ever been followed by a woman before? He shrugged as best he could from his position on the ground. By women, yes. I've very seldom been followed by foolhardy hellcats. I don't know why not, I murmured, a pulse of need roaring to life between my thighs. Hellcats are known for going after what they want. His eyes went hot with need and his nostrils flared. They aren't the only ones. I don't know which of us moved first, but I know that if he hadn't I would have. Our lips crushed together as he rolled me over onto my back once more, and this time I made no effort to stop him. My brain sent a somewhat half-hearted message to point out that I was on my back under a werewolf who was also a murder suspect in one of the roughest and most werewolf-friendly parts of town, but my brain wasn't calling the shots tonight. Besides, what easier way to get him to believe that my motives were purely sexual than by putting my proverbial money where my mouth was? Hell, who was I kidding? In that moment I wanted him like I'd never wanted another male in my life. Maybe I was still under the influence of the wolf pheromones from earlier. Maybe the 6-month dry spell had caught up with me. Or maybe it was simply that Tanner was the best-looking, most desirable male I had ever met, but whatever it was, this was going to happen and I was going to enjoy every wicked moment. Chapter 5. I stared up at the ceiling as the sunlight streamed through the window and tried not to wince. What the hell had I done? This wasn't me waking up hungover or still drunk and wondering where I was, who I was with, and how I had ended up there. This was me waking up and wondering what had possessed me to sleep with a murder suspect. I rolled over in bed and looked at Kenai Tanner asleep beside me. Okay, now I remembered what had possessed me, which didn't make it a good idea. On the other hand, as sweet memories of the previous night lit up in my mind, I couldn't quite bring myself to regret it. Having pounded me to orgasm in the alley, Tanner had demonstrated the other side of his nature once we got into bed. For 2.5 hours he treated my body as his private play area, leaving no part of it unstimulated, taking me to heaven over and over until he finally joined me and we came together one last extraordinary time as I Rode him furiously, the headboard smacking rhythmically against the wall. If you're going to abandon professional ethics and common sense in one stupid night, then this was definitely the way to do it. But again, none of this made it a good idea. I had to get out of here. He hadn't gotten around to asking my name, too busy exchanging fluids, so if I slipped out now I could remain a one-night stand. He never heard from again. A delicious memory to warm him in his old age. Or possibly a delicious memory that would come back to accuse him of the attempted murder of his father, depending on how things went from here on in. Yeah, I definitely needed to get out of here. It was still early, and Tanner showed no immediate sign of waking. He had earned his rest. I had time to sneak out before he woke up and started asking all the questions I didn't want to answer. Gingerly, I stretched a cautious foot out of bed and winced as 20 or so different muscles complained Tanner had certainly put me through it. Paused for a moment, pondering how much I would like to wake him now, drag him into the shower and see how many more muscles we could strain. But I was thinking a bit more clearly now. Besides, certain parts of me needed a day off, possibly a week. I slunk out of the bed, gathered my clothes up off the floor, wasting valuable time looking for my panties before remembering they were in an alley in tatters, and got dressed. With my shoes in my hand and with one last longing look at the sleeping Tanner, I slipped out of the door. Out in the corridor, I took a moment to get my bearings, recalling the way we had walked the night before. My feet made no noise in the thick piled carpet. As I tiptoed towards the main staircase, glancing occasionally at the art on the walls, which veered from hunting scenes to nudes to modern art that I guessed was mainly collected for value. Ayers' house was the official residence of the sons of Kenai pack leaders, or had been for the last 3 generations, and the decor bore the hallmarks of different personalities, leaving their impression upon it. From somewhere in the building, I heard the sounds of movement and the rustle of whispers, probably servants rather than the heirs themselves, all of whom had had a late night, but I didn't want to be caught, or even seen by anyone. On my way out, the plan was to vanish as if I had never been here, leaving nothing more than a warm spot in Tanner's bed, and certainly leaving no way for them to find me. If Tanner found me, then he would find out I was a PI, and then he'd start to ask questions about what I had been doing at the party last night and why I lied to him about it when he asked. As I reached the stairs, the sounds of movement got louder, footsteps coming from the far end of the landing. Caution was no longer an option. I ran down the stairs like Cinderella leaving the ball, though I was a bit more careful with my shoes. My feet slapped on the marble floor of the hallway as I hit the base of the stairs and ran on. I had no time now to worry about the noise I made. I just needed out. Reaching the door, I fumbled with the heavy iron bolts that seemed more an aesthetic choice than a practical one. Locks were not necessary at Ayers' house. Anyone breaking in clearly had a death wish. The last bolt slid back. I hauled the heavy oak door back and ducked out into the bright, cool morning air. Once I had made it a few blocks away, I stopped to put my shoes on, and it was only then that I felt I could breathe safely and slow down for long enough to assess the situation. True, I had crossed a professional line last night, but Tanner did not know my name and had no way of finding me, so no harm, no foul. And while nothing I had learned last night could be called definitive, it had been interesting, and I had a better sense of Tanner at least. Perhaps I could not quite dismiss him as a suspect, but I felt I could put him on the back burner for now. All in all, I was calling last night a success, in more ways than one. It was, therefore, with a certain amount of smugness that, having headed home for a shower and a change of clothes, I went into the office to make a few calls around my werewolf contacts, looking for information about Gray and Hudson. I opened the door and froze. Seated in my outer office waiting for me were the 2 werewolves I had just been thinking about, and between them the werewolf with whom I had spent the previous night. Their eyes were on the door as I came in, as if they had been waiting for me. My mind raced as I sought for something to say, but what the hell could I say? If they had found me, then they knew what I was, and who knew how much else? They knew? Probably that I was in the employ of their father, and that they were the objects of my investigation. And yet, while all that was of course on my mind, my greatest worry was the thought that Tanner might think I had slept with him just to get information, or distract him from the fact I had been following him. For whatever reason, I desperately didn't want him to think that of me. None of which rapid-fire thinking gave me a useful opener in the conversation I now had to have, but fortunately Tanner started for me. "You left without saying goodbye," He said it without reproach, but I still flinched. In the circumstances, I thought it was best to avoid any awkward questions. There didn't seem to be any point in lying, but nor was I going to volunteer information until I had a better idea of how much they knew. I think we'd all appreciate a little information on the exact nature of those circumstances, replied Tanner. I shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. One-nighters are always awkward come the morning. Tanner grinned. Not what I meant. But wolves can appreciate guile when it's motivated by loyalty, in this case to your client. Perhaps we should tell you what we know. Why? Snarled Gray. He was not looking at me with any sympathy, and his clear fury sent a cold trickle of fear down my neck. Because she's just doing her job, Gray, pointed out Hudson, a more happy-go-lucky presence. And because we might need her. They might need me? What the hell did that mean? Your name is Lana Malone, Tanner went on. You're a part wolf and a private investigator specializing in cases involving wolves. Right so far? I nodded. Mind if I ask how you know all that? Yes, said Gray. Here it gets a bit more speculative, said Tanner. We're guessing, but I'd bet my inheritance that we're right. You were hired by our father, Kenai King, to investigate us because he thinks we had something to do with the attempt on his life at the lunar hunt. The assassin was trailed to Ayer's house, I said, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. That's what they say, Gray put in sullenly. We're not denying that someone tried to kill our father, said Hudson. Quite the reverse. And that someone may well be close to him, someone who fancies themselves next in line for pack leader if our father died and the three of us were accused of his death. It's a theory, I acknowledged. In fact, it was a theory I had been wondering about myself. After last night, I found it harder to see Tanner and his brothers as killers. It's a theory that we'd like you to look into, said Tanner. What? Werewolves are not investigators, admitted Tanner. We don't have the temperament. We're good at dealing with the perpetrators when they're found, but bad at finding them. We want to hire you. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. You want to hire me to prove your innocence? No, Hudson put in. We want to hire you to find out who tried to kill our father. We know it's not one of us, so it must be someone else, and you're wasting time while the real killer prepares to have another try. The investigation takes you where it takes you, said Tanner. So it's not interfering with any prior arrangement you might have made with any other member of our family, on which subject I note you have still made no comment. It was tempting, if only to get paid for doing both sides of the investigation, and the three sons did have a point. If King was wrong, then I was wasting my time and he would end up dead. And if he ended up dead, then chances were I wouldn't get paid. But I had already been hired to do a job. And whichever way you looked at it, the job of investigating Tanner, Gray, and Hudson was not compatible with being hired by them. I had my professional ethics, and despite the serious lapse in them last night, I was sticking to them. I'm sorry. I'm going to do the job that I was paid to do. You don't think investigating us will be difficult now we know you're at it? Suggested Hudson. Not to mention awkward, since you and Tanner did the wild thing. I didn't back down and I didn't blush. Difficult and awkward aren't the same as impossible. I don't back out on clients. But you do bed down with suspects? Suggested Hudson, a sly grin on his handsome face. Was there anything else you wanted? I asked. Because if not, I have work to do. The brothers looked at each other. Perhaps they had not expected the meeting to go like this. I was very aware of the fact that there were, in this room at the moment, 3 individuals who could kill me if they wanted. They might not quite be able to do it with impunity, but as the sons of Kenai King, the law might not look at them too hard. I wouldn't have been human if I did not have a flicker of anxiety in me, but I strove not to show it. I didn't back down. They were in my office, my territory, and they had better not forget it. Werewolves respect strength. All right, said Tanner finally. I guess we'll see you around. I won't be far away, I replied, still holding my own but barely. Besides the awkwardness of this all, I was having serious flashbacks of Tanner's hands on me, and it was jumbling my thoughts. Not to mention the strange reaction I was seeming to have over that wicked gleam in Hudson's eyes. I slammed the door on those thoughts and watched as the Kenai brothers headed for the door, Gray leading the way, followed by Hudson and Tanner. Tanner. The eldest brother turned back as I said his name, looking at me with an unreadable expression on his face. I wanted to tell him that last night had not been about using him, that I hadn't slept with him for information, but because I had wanted to. I wanted to tell him that it had meant something to me, and damn it, I wanted to know if it had maybe meant something to him too. But how the hell was I supposed to communicate any of that without weakening my stance? Without compromising my investigation still further? I'll be in touch, I found myself saying without really knowing why. Tanner nodded, a little baffled perhaps, and exited, closing the door behind him. I slumped. However much I wanted to believe in him and his innocence, I knew that he could still be an attempted murderer. My gut instincts all said he wasn't, but those instincts were now being undermined by our night together. I liked him, and that was not a good thing to say. To make matters worse, I kept thinking about his brothers. Even Gray, as chilly as he'd been, had captured my imagination. Had Tanner awoken some secret animal inside me? And if so, how was I going to put her back to sleep? The room seemed somehow larger now the three had left. It was not that they took up a huge amount of space physically, although they were big guys, but their charisma seemed to fill the room. They each carried an aura with them, something that I reluctantly found deeply sexual, which made me feel cramped, or even trapped. Presented with that much raw sexuality, I felt like I had no place to go, except towards them. It was similar to the sensation I had felt in the hall last night, that overwhelming abundance of wolf pheromones in the air, but in my little office with just the 3 males and uber males at that, it was all the more potent. I threw open a window to let the fresh air in, and also so I could watch my 3 guests walking away down the street. They were not accompanied by bodyguards. They had gone out of their way to keep my secret. What did that say about their possible guilt? Were they trying to put me off the scent? Or were they genuinely trying to find the real killer? Either way, they had something to gain, and I was nowhere near yet making up my mind about the sons of Kenai. Chapter 6. I don't know, L. The voice of Daryl, one of my contacts in the werewolf community, crackled uncertainly on the other end of the phone. I haven't heard nothing about a hiring, but then I don't always stay up on this stuff. And the high-class killers, you know, they don't advertise when they got a job. I know, I said. Anyone you can press on it without raising suspicions? I could hear Daryl shaking his head, his shaggy hair grazing the phone. You're talking about some pretty top-end stuff. Start asking questions on that, and they may be the last questions a poor boy asks. I understand, Daryl. And I did. Daryl knew I paid well for information, but it wasn't worth his life. Just keep an ear to the ground. No need to raise any flags, but if you hear something on the grapevine, anything at all, let me know. Will do, L. Later. Later, Daryl. I hung up and sat back in my seat pensively. The last few days of phone calls and pounding the pavements had not been productive. Although I was working for the pack leader, I was struggling to get help from my usual contacts on the ground. The fact was that, even though I hadn't said anything, everybody knew who the suspects were, and they were not that happy about going against the brothers. Whether King was killed or not, there was still a chance that one of them would be the next pack leader somewhere down the line, and no one wanted to be on the bad side of a pack leader. I glanced down at the notepad in front of me, on which, at some point that afternoon, I had scrawled 3 names: Arctic, Hawkeye, Mackenzie. The other 3 pack leaders all had something to gain by assassinating King, and had even more to gain by framing one of the brothers. Come to think of it, framing all 3 of them, or framing a brother but not a specific one, would be even better. Frame Tanner and Gray would be next in line, but if all 3 were suspected, then King's death would lead to chaos as power was dragged between different factions supporting each of the brothers. And in the midst of that anarchy, another pack could easily attack and take the Kenai territory. It would be the biggest power shift in the city for generations. But the fact that it was plausible didn't make it so. The brothers' motives were just as plausible together or separately, and the poor relationship they each enjoyed with their father just made it all the more believable. Since their unexpected visit last Saturday, I had done a bit of nosing around, and made up a set of biographical notes on the brothers. It made for pretty wild reading. Tanner's temper had gotten him into trouble more times than I could count. When he was younger, he had crossed the border into Mackenzie territory simply because someone had called him a name. He had taken down 5 wolves by the time the police showed up, and King had had to buy his son out of jail. Gray was more shadowy. He had had a mate, who seemed to have died, though I could find no details as to how. He had also vanished for 18 months. When he was 18, no one knew where he had gone, but he had come back with an imposing scar on his chest. Teenagers, they had all indulged a bit in drink and women, partying hard and fucking harder, but Hudson seemed not to have grown out of it. As a young man, he had favored older females of his own species, and however loose were werewolf rules on mating, he had still refused to be constrained by them, forcing his father into some very awkward conversations with members of the pack court, whose mates had been appropriated for one night, then abandoned. Perhaps for that reason, or because of changing tastes as he grew up, he had acquired a taste for human women, looking for a bit of tail. 6 months ago he had gone missing for a week and been found passed out drunk, stark naked, with 5 human women. His clothing was never found. First, it made me wonder if King had a point, but the stories about the youth of the current pack leader were at least as wild and were all tempered with violence. There was not a story about Kenai King that did not end in blood. Night had fallen while I stared at my notes, and I was still pondering what to do next when the phone on my desk rang. Malone. Miss Malone? This is Kenai Hudson. These guys surprised me at every turn. I hadn't expected to sleep with Tanner. I hadn't expected to find the 3 of them in my office, and now they were calling me out of the blue. I thought I made my answer clear, I said, laying down the law before he had the chance to say anything. I need your help. I didn't know who else to turn to. Now I could hear the panic sharp in his voice. Gray's been hurt. Where are you? Surely there were better people than me for him to call? Sleaford Street, said Hudson. That was Hawkeye territory. No wonder he hadn't called another wolf. I'll be there as soon as I can. Thank you. I could tell from his voice that he meant it. I ran out of my office and took the stairs 3 at a time. Outside I jumped into my car and headed off into the night, leaving the speed limit far behind me. Questions raced through my head as I drove. What were they doing in Hawkeye territory, dangerous for any Kenai wolf? An act of war for a pack leader's son. How had Gray been hurt and how badly? And of course, was there a chance that this was a trick, and they were setting me up to get me out of the way? While I lived next door to the border with Arctic territory, I had to drive all across the Kenai territory to cross into Hawkeye-held ground. For a part wolf, it was as easy as it was for a human. You didn't even notice you were doing it, but for a wolf there had to be a reason. One of the first things I did when I went into my current line of work was to commit the map of the city to memory. I doubt that even a taxi driver knew their way around the city better than I did. It was my hobby to have an exact knowledge of the city, and I could pinpoint every street in the territory into which it fell. Sleaford Street was not right on the edge of Hawkeye territory, but nor was it in the heartland. It was deep enough in that Gray must have had one hell of a good reason. It was about half an hour after I got the call from Hudson that I rounded a corner onto Sleaford, and my headlights caught Hudson standing by the wall with Gray slumped on the ground behind him. But they weren't alone. 3 werewolves stalked towards them, their bodies shaggy with hair, their claws held ready, their teeth bared for action. Hudson had put himself between them and his stricken brother, and as I watched I saw him change his shirt, splitting as his muscular chest expanded still further, his bright blonde hair seeming to explode across his body. He roared back at his adversaries, ferociously determined to protect Gray. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot down on the gas and plowed the car straight into the leader of the Hawkeye werewolves. The wolf flew forwards, bouncing from the hood of my car into a shop, going straight through the plate glass window. Not enough to kill a werewolf, but enough to slow it down for now. The second werewolf took to its heels, racing off into the night, but the third stood its ground and snarled at me through my car window, daring me to step out. I did, brandishing my favorite handgun that I always kept in the glove box. The beast snarled, but then took a step back as a shaft of moonlight caught the cylinder of the gun, and the silver bullet within glistened. I smiled and took aim. The werewolf's legs seemed to spin on the spot for a minute, like when Scooby-Doo started running, and then he took off after his friend like a streak of black hairy lightning. I took a moment to feel smug, but no longer. Chances were he had gone to fetch some friends, and a groan from the shop window reminded me that we were still not alone. Get him into the car, I snapped at Hudson, who had been standing staring, and was clearly impressed by what he had seen. Now he leaped into action, shifting back into human and gathering up his brother in his strong arms. I caught the sight of blood in the moonlight and the scent hit me moments later. I may have been only a part wolf, but the smell of blood is keyed into my DNA at a very primal level. Hudson laid Gray onto one of the back seats and got in beside him, while I leaped back in and fired up the engine. Let's get the hell out of here. It was only once we were out of Hawkeye territory that I spoke. Any of them know who you are? Hudson shook his head. I don't think so. They knew we were Kenai wolves, but not. You sure? No, Hudson admitted. But I guess we'll know tomorrow. When the whole damn world comes crashing down? I snapped. Yeah, that will be a pretty good hint. Hey, this wasn't my idea. Hudson defended himself sharply. And maybe you want to hear the whole story before you start laying into Gray. Well, that was the sort of opening that a private investigator doesn't ignore. Perhaps you'd like to tell me that whole story then? Hudson looked away, down at his unconscious brother. It's not my story to tell. And you aren't my responsibility to rescue. Unless you want me to dump you. Back in Hawkeye Land, I suggest you talk. He shook his head. I don't think you'd do that. Probably not, but I still want to know what happened tonight. Hudson nodded. Can we get him home first? I glanced in my mirror to see the face of Kenai Hudson as he looked down at his brother. It was hard to square that face, so filled with fear and love, with the stories of the rampant party animal who thought with his dick and cared about nothing and no one beyond his own pleasure. One look at that face told me that there was at least one other thing that Hudson cared about, and that thing was bleeding on the back seat of my car. We're going to need a doctor, I said. Do you know anyone we can trust? Hudson nodded and reached for his phone. I'll have him meet us at Ayers' house. I believe you know the way. I caught the hint of a grin on his face as he referred to my one-nighter with his brother, but it was masking his worry. Hudson was one of those who would be making jokes on his own deathbed, desperately trying to use humor to distract from horror. Right now I thought he was doing it more for his own benefit than anyone else's. You didn't need to be a medical expert to see that. Gray was badly wounded. The thought of losing his brother was more than Hudson could stand to consider, and so he made his jokes, and I was happy enough to let him. Truth be told, the thought of Gray dying upset me more than I would have expected as well. Why did I care? I barely knew him, but there it was. Inexplicably, irrationally, unwillingly I cared. And that was bad. Very bad. Let's go. Chapter 7. The lounge of Ayers' house was one of those rooms that seems bigger than it is, and it was not small to begin with. The only light came from the roaring fire in the huge grate beneath the marble mantel, and from a pair of elaborate candlesticks on the side tables, which framed the vast couch on which I perched. Werewolves live in the modern world. They have tablets, iPhones, and of course electric lights, but many still prefer candlelight and a grand Gothic aesthetic for the look of the thing. This central light source made the boundaries of the room vague and shadowy. The location of the walls and corners became uncertain, making the high-ceilinged room seem more cavernous, as did the grand size of the furniture. Spread out in front of the fire was a rug that seemed to be made of some animal skin, shaggily haired, but was too large for that. I wondered if it was the skins of King's enemies stitched together. 3 club chairs were arranged about the fire, either side of the couch, their elderly leather creased, stained, and scratched, dented in the middle from the bottoms of successive generations of werewolf nobility. The couch on which I sat was about twice the length of a normal couch. Its frame was ornately carved in dark wood, and its cushions had been patched and recovered over and over, without ever bothering to remove the previous fabric, making it a hodgepodge of styles and colors in various shades of faded. It was very comfortable, but I sat on the edge of it, clasping my knees, wondering what might happen next. Confidence was always key in dealing with werewolves, but I wasn't sure where I stood at this moment. I had surely betrayed my client, Kenai King, by yet again colluding with the people I was supposed to be investigating. On the other hand, I had saved his son's life and potentially averted a war that had to count for something. But Hudson had called me. Of all the people out there he could have called. And of all the brothers, Hudson had the most human friends. He had called me. Talk about getting too close to a case. If Gray lived, then probably none of this would matter. The doctor was trusted. I would keep my mouth shut, and Neither Hudson nor Gray wanted any of this to come out, but if he died. The heavy doors that sealed the lounge opened, creaking on their aging hinges, and Hudson entered. "How is he?" I asked, but the question was almost unnecessary as I could already see the relief on Hudson's face. "The jackass has managed to get himself torn up pretty good," smiled Hudson. Even his choice of words broadcasting the good news, but they seem to have gone out of their way to avoid clawing anything too important. "He needs to rest up, but he'll be fine. The doctor's going to stay the night in his room, just to make sure." He sat down heavily on the couch beside me, his smile still beaming, but as he drew in a long breath of relief, the flickering firelight caught the glint of a tear in his eye. "Fucking idiot," he murmured. I allowed him to collect himself and he turned to me. "Thank you. Really. I cannot possibly thank you enough for what you did tonight. You didn't have any reason to help us. In fact, I suppose you had plenty of reasons not to, so yeah, thank you." I shrugged. "Put it down to curiosity. I'm told that kills only cats. I'm part wolf. We thrive on curiosity." Hudson nodded. "I've a feeling I know the direction in which this conversation is going." "Well," he nodded, "I owe you at least that. At least an explanation. I hope I can trust you not to let what I'm about to tell you leave this room." I held up a hand. "If it's pertinent to the case, then I make no promises." Hudson shrugged. "It's not. I'm sure you will see that it's not. And I trust you to do the right thing once you know the full story." "Why?" I asked. I genuinely wanted to know. "Why what? Why do you trust me?" He gave me a cocky little smile that I fancied reflected the real Kenai. "Hudson, if you can explain why you trust a person, then it's not trust. Real trust should be like true faith, instinctive and inexplicable. Now do you want to hear this or not?" I settled back onto the comfortable couch and indicated for him to proceed. "Would you like a drink? It's a longish story." "Sure." He went to a large stuffed bear by the wall and opened its belly to reveal a drinks cabinet. "Brandy. Why not?" As he poured, he began to tell his story. "You know, I suppose that Gray had a mate? Her name was Yuko. She was Gray's mate, but..." Hudson paused as he handed me my drink. "You know that it's said Inuit people have 100 different words for snow." I nodded. "Werewolves are like the exact opposite of that with the word mate. It's one word that covers a lot of bases and means different things in almost every case. Maria is now my father's mate. I doubt there's a lot of affection there, but it is recognized. I've mated with my share of females and by werewolf lore, they all ought to be recognized as my mate, but none of them would say they were. Yuko was Gray's mate, but it was more like a marriage." I could already feel the tightness in my chest as the story unfolded. "That happens for wolves sometimes, just as it does for humans. You find a person you want to be with. Of course, for wolves it's not a constraint. Yuko and Gray were free to take other mates. That's our way. But they chose not to. And that's our way too. Love exists for werewolves as keenly as it does for humans, just in a greater variety of forms." He swirled the brandy in his glass and contemplated the flames before us. "It might surprise you to hear, but I envied my brother. I know what everyone says about me, and it's all true. But that doesn't mean I don't want more, and to see the look that passed between Gray and Yuko, and to know they had something that I could never even imagine, I was envious. I was getting laid 6 ways from Sunday, and yet he was happier than me. And believe me, I was very happy. Still am. That's beside the point." He slugged back the brandy and poured another glass before topping me up. "Yuko's family lived near the Hokkaido border. You know the area?" I nodded. "Bad district," said Hudson. "They say the wolves there hunt the rats that live in their walls for food. Nasty area. Wolves from there don't mate with a son of Kenai King, and certainly not exclusively. Your father didn't approve." "If by didn't approve you mean hated even the idea, then yeah, he didn't approve." Hudson drank again. Gray was his favorite before that, although it was more a process of elimination, I imagine. Tanner was the hothead and I was the wastrel, but still, he could see how someone clever and thoughtful like Gray could be pack leader someday, but not with Yuko as his only mate. What would happen to the next generation? Can't have someone like that diluting the Kenai bloodline. There were fights, terrible arguments. Days when I thought one would kill the other. In the end, Yuko left here, where she'd been living, and went to visit with her family until things between Gray and my father were sorted out. Another drink vanished, another poured. I struggled to keep up. Brandy was stronger than I was used to. You know the deal in that area of town. On the border. You accept that shit will, from time to time, go down. And because not even Kenai King wants to be at war with every pack all at once, little border incursions are overlooked. As long as they're not claiming territory. There was a border raid? I guess. I had a grim feeling that I knew where this story was going. The wolves on the Hawkeye side of that border are as poor as those on the Kenai, said Hudson. There are raids back and forth all the damn time. People get killed. He didn't have to say any more than that. She was a good female. I mean, she was kinder and more honest than anyone growing up in that area. Has a right to be. Hard bitch too. Could teach anyone a lesson in a fight. There was no investigation? I asked. Hudson shook his head. As we've mentioned, not a strong point or a priority. Most times. Not our style. If the raiders had been going after territory, then there would have been reprisals. Or if it had been an official raid ordered by Hawkeye Jack. Or he looked into the fire. Or if someone important had been killed. Gray went to our father and demanded action, but no. And maybe father was right. Starting a war over a few lives? Who does that benefit? Still seems a shabby way to treat the death of a good woman. But Gray wouldn't let it go? I hazarded. Would you? As Hudson turned to look at me, his face was thrown into relief by the fire. And I was struck as never before by what a beautiful male he was. The flames gave his golden hair an aura, and made his blue eyes sparkle the way I had seen in him at the party, though now they were tinged with sadness. He felt for his brother's loss, and that honest melancholy made him even more compelling than he had already been. He's been investigating on his own, Hudson continued, although that might not be the proper word for it. It's more of a hunt, albeit an organized one, with lots of planning, reams of notes as he tries to figure out who it was who robbed him of Yuko. But werewolves aren't cut out for that, I said, the realization finally sinking in that Yuko's killers had never been found. Hudson's lips tipped into a crooked, sad smile. He's no closer now than he was then. He still steals into Hawkeye territory to ask questions or to follow up on what he thinks is a lead. Tonight, he was seen as he crossed and they cut him off so he couldn't get back. They chased him deeper into their territory and caught up to him. By a miracle, a police car came by before they could finish him off. Human police don't like werewolves brawling. He was able to get away while they were hiding from the cops. That's when he called me half dead. But, of course, by the time I got there, they'd found him again. He'd left a trail of blood a blind wolf could follow. Fortunately, I'd guessed there might be trouble and called you on my way. And then you saved us. I pondered the fire. No wonder Gray was so sullen and taciturn all the time, snapping at any who tried to show him friendship. He was living in the shadow of tragedy. No wonder he hated his father. Hudson glanced at the clock on the mantel. It's late. You can stay here if you'd like. I raised an eyebrow, but Hudson held up his hands. No funny business. We've plenty enough spare rooms you can use. He had a reputation, of course, and one that he did nothing to deny, but I trusted him. How about one last drink? I suggested. After that story, I needed something to take the edge off. Grief weighed on my chest like an anvil, but I couldn't deny part of it was self-serving. I'd learned more in the couple hours about these men and the workings of their pack than ever before. There was still an attempted murderer at large, and it was still my job to ferret them out. Who knew what other useful information Hudson might share as we continued talking? As the night wore on, somehow we migrated down from the couch to sit with our backs against it on the rug before the fire, the bottle of brandy between us. With his brother stable and the story told, Hudson became the easiest of company, peppering his conversation with jokes and stories that tumbled out of him at speed. He became less guarded as the night wore on and the drink continued to flow, but so did I. How is a beautiful female like you single? I prefer woman to female. Sorry, force of habit. Divided by a common language, that's what they say. Isn't it? But that doesn't answer my question. I sighed, letting my mind adjust to the weight of brandy pulling it in. Contradictory directions. I guess I'm happy enough single? Really? No, not really. But any other answer makes me sound a bit pathetic. His mouth kicked up into a grin and I chuckled ruefully. It's tough being a part wolf. I gave my standard response. Neither one thing nor the other straddling two worlds. Rather than straddling. No. I put a finger on his lips and he snapped at it playfully as if to bite. Human men are scared of me, even the ones who like me. I was with a man once for months. He knew what I was and I thought just for once it wasn't going to matter. Then I opened his bedside drawer one day and found a gun inside. Silver bullets? You're damn right, I said, swigging my drink. Fucker. Wanted to take a walk on the wild side, but first argument and I show a sign of anger, he probably would have capped me without even thinking about it. Where's the trust? What about wolf males? Asked Hudson. What about them? Nothing wrong with a bit of interspecies mattress surfing. You should know, I said with a grin. And proud of it. But, I pointed a wayward finger at him. Ever been with a part wolf? He stopped and frowned. Do you know, oddly enough, I'm not sure I have. I nodded. That's the usual deal. Happy with your own kind, happy to cross the border for a little detour, but something in between? That's just weird. Hudson nodded sagely. Maybe you're right. I've been nursing a prejudice. Without knowing it. I am officially a better person for having known you. Next. Female, sorry, woman, next woman I pick up will be a part wolf. And when I nail her, know that I'll be nailing her for you, he said, his solemn tone belied by the gleam in his eyes. We clinked glasses as if this was something worth toasting, but I still shook my head, now really pondering the topic more deeply. But that's different, isn't it? You're not looking for anything more, are you? It's just sex. I had expected another teasing response, but a curious expression crossed Hudson's face. That's the word, isn't it? That's what they say about Kenai Hudson. Let me tell you, that sort of thing can become a, what do you call it? A self-fulfilling prophecy. What woman looking for a relationship would spend time with me? They all know. Kenai Hudson good for a good time, but nothing more. Nothing more. He paused to finish his drink. This is nice, you know. Talking to you. I like talking to you. Well, I like talking to you too. It was true I did. I wouldn't have thought it likely, and my motives were muddy to start at best, but damned if it wasn't the truth. I don't usually talk to women. So many other things to do to them. So many things they want me to do to them. He shook his head. A reputation can be a terrible thing, you know. Did you know there's a group of human women who call themselves the Hudson's Hoes? Like Hudson Hawk, you know, that crap movie. There's about 30 of them, all in their own little chat room talking about what I'm like, what we did the night before, writing fan fiction about what they'd like to do. Now, cards on the table, I've had some good times with those women, and God knows it's not like I'm turning them down. I bring this stuff on myself, but he paused, the train of thought stopping to take on more passengers. You know, half the time the stuff they want me to do, it's, and I know this will sound odd coming from me, it's just degrading to women. Do you do it? I asked. Well, yes. Mostly. I draw the line at hurting them. Spanking is fine, but no more than that. And they get pissed if I don't. You know, they don't want a bit of fun, they want to be taken by an animal. Play like it's against their will. Maybe that's not what I want. But you do it anyway? I guess. Yes, but just to be polite. My heart's not in it. He sighed. Fortunately. It's not my heart they want to be in it. You could stop. I suggested. Let's not be hasty, he said with a quick and wicked grin that sent a bolt of heat through me. I laughed. Seems like you're enjoying it just a bit. No question, Hudson admitted. But it's still not what I want, I just. You're afraid that you'll never find what you want. So why not enjoy what you have? He looked at me, and even through the haze of drink, his face was more serious than it had been all evening. That's exactly right. I want to find the right person. But maybe all this stuff is what's stopping me from finding the right person. Mayuko. Someone. He looked at me. Someone I can talk to. I guess the drinks played a role, as did my basic primal attraction to all the Kenai brothers, but I think it was the simple, honest beauty of the moment that made me lean forward and kiss Hudson. And as soon as I had tasted him on my lips, I knew that this was not going to stop at kissing. Chapter 9. whatever resolutions I had made concerning my professional conduct since waking up in Tanner's bed had clearly not taken, as I was waking up this morning in Hudson's bed. I probably should have seen this as me making a bad situation worse, further undermining the morally shaky ground I found myself. But I actually felt less guilty this morning. I didn't feel the urge to make myself scarce as quickly as possible. Quite the reverse, in fact. I wanted to stay. I was still kidding myself a bit that sticking around was a good way to investigate the brothers, but every moment I spent with these guys made me less able to believe that they were killers. The fact that several of the moments I had spent with them I had spent being fucked probably made that less of a valid opinion, but I wasn't just thinking with my downstairs. I've been an investigator for long enough to know when something doesn't add up. And something about this sure as hell didn't. While Hudson slept on, I cautiously lifted the covers and peered under. He was hard even as he slept. So much sexual energy in that guy. I hoped he was dreaming of me. I slipped out of bed, dressed, and headed out of his room, shutting the door carefully behind me so as not to wake him. Where now? I was determined to stay, at least until I knew that Gray was out of danger. Until then, I was ravenously hungry after the night's activities. A maid came out of one of the other rooms and smiled at me without any show of surprise at my being there. Strange women coming out of Hudson's bedroom first thing in the morning were probably not that unusual. Can you point me to the kitchen? I asked. A few minutes later, I trotted down the cold stone steps that led to the basement kitchen. It was a big old-fashioned farmhouse kitchen made to cater for dozens rather than the 3 brothers and handful of servants it currently served. Morning light flooded in through diagonally sunk shafts in the walls that led up to skylights. Standing at the long range encrusted with years of burned and blackened grease, Tanner stood, wearing an apron as he fried eggs and bacon. The apron was a necessity as the food spat hot oil as he cooked, and apart from the apron he was naked. It occurred to me, in between long lingering looks at Tanner's ass, that the eldest of the Kenai brothers had been no part of last night's operation to rescue Gray. Had he perhaps been out of town, only returning this morning? Or had there been some other reason that neither Hudson nor Gray had thought to call him? I saw his head twitch slightly as I came closer and guessed that he had caught my scent over the smell of cooking bacon and egg. Good morning, Miss Malone. Didn't expect to see you here. And yet my presence did not seem to bother him. Breakfast. That would be great. I was too hungry to worry much about the potential awkwardness of bumping into the guy I slept with so recently, having just slept with his brother. One thing at a time. Tanner nodded, shoveled the bacon and egg onto a plate for me, and began to make more for himself. There's coffee in the machine. He nodded towards it. I poured myself a cup and seated myself at the big, rough-hewn table in the middle of the room. I thought you'd have cooks or something. Tanner shook his head. Wolves don't like anybody else messing with their food. You have to live with them to know things like that. He flipped the bacon. Seems to me that there was some stuff going on in this house last night that I didn't know about. Any chance you'd like to tell me about it? I took a swallow of coffee and then a deep breath. The one thing that werewolves could not abide in their sexual relationships was dishonesty. I slept with Hudson. Tanner laughed. You have a unique approach to murder investigation. Attempted murder, I reminded him. For now. He cracked an egg onto the range. The longer you spend investigating us in your own unusual fashion, the greater the chance the real killer will strike again. I didn't sleep with you as part of any investigation. Probably not what he was expecting me to say, but it had been burning at me and I wanted to say it. Tanner looked at me and I saw in his eyes that he wanted to believe it. I followed you because of the investigation. I fought with you because, well, it seemed like the thing to do. But everything else that happened between us was what I wanted. As an investigator, it was perhaps the dumbest thing I've ever done, but I don't regret it for an instant. And I know that. Maybe a weird thing to say when I slept with your brother last night, but it's true. Do you regret sleeping with him? Asked Tanner. No, I admitted. I didn't set out to make a habit of it, but things happened and I'm not sorry they did. Again, I realize this is weird. Tanner scoffed as he joined me at the table. It's only weird if you're human. When Hudson wakes up, which won't be for a while, he is not an early riser, I guarantee the first thing he will do is come see me to tell me that he mated with you last night. Because he knows That I mated with you a few nights before. That's how it is with us. As long as there is honesty and openness, then there is no jealousy. Doesn't preclude sex. Or even love. He shot me a look across the table before his dark eyes returned to his food. It's good that you told me. Perhaps the wolf in you made you do it. He smiled, his handsome face becoming suddenly still. More handsome. I smiled back, feeling more comfortable now than I had since coming in. That was werewolves for you. It wasn't a problem that I had slept with both of them, and though nothing specific had been said, I got the feeling that it wouldn't be a problem if I slept with either or both again. Not that I was necessarily thinking of it, but good to know. Interesting though this conversation has been, Tanner went on, when I asked about what was going on last night. You and Hudson having a bit of fun was not what I had in mind. I avoided his gaze. Hudson had presumably kept Gray's adventure to himself for a reason, and it was not my secret to tell. On the other hand, it was not that big a house, and he was going to learn of it sooner or later. Gray got into a fight. I decided to keep the details as sparse as I could. He was badly hurt. He's fine, I added quickly as I saw fear flood into Tanner's eyes. But Hudson got a doctor in just in case. And they called you? Tanner was not slow on the uptake. Yes. I saw the thoughts pursuing each other across his face. He was in Hawkeye territory again, wasn't he? My plan to keep the details on the cutie hadn't gone so well. I swallowed the last forkful of egg and washed it down with the dregs of my coffee. Thanks. For breakfast. Are you trying to put me off? I'm sure Hudson will be down soon. You really haven't gotten to know him yet, have you? And he will be able to explain everything to you. Yes, I bet he can't wait, said Tanner, darkly but not cruelly. For all that wild side of his nature that his father so deplored, he was clearly the strict older brother, keeping an eye on the antics of his younger siblings. Both of them idiots. I raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't catch you crossing the boundaries like that. Tanner couldn't help smiling as I pushed back my chair and headed out of the kitchen. Though I had initially been concerned about seeing him for obvious reasons, in the event I had been pleased to bump into Kenai Tanner, and breakfast had been thoroughly pleasant. That said, I couldn't let the case slip from my mind completely. I was in one of the key sites of the crime, the place to which the would-be assassin had been trailed before disappearing without a trace. Decided to have a walk about the place to get my bearings and see if I could figure out where the man might have gone. The Kenai werewolves had followed his trail to the hall, off of which led several other rooms, none of which had yielded any absolute sign. Opinion was that he might have gone into each of those rooms, so his scent and that of his blood was in all of them. I visited each of the rooms, casting an eye about, and finding nothing suspicious. I then walked around the adjoining corridors. After this, I did the exact same thing again, then went back around in reverse. Sometime on that third time around, something started to bother me. It was not anything specific at first, just a niggle at the back of my mind, but as I walked around again, that niggle began to coalesce into something more solid. I hurried back into the game room and paced across it with measured steps. Back in the hall, I did the same thing. I was right, and it might be a good idea to tell someone else before I vanished without a trace. Still no Hudson? I asked Tanner as I poked my head back into the kitchen to find him doing the washing up, aided by one of the maids. Tanner glanced at his watch. You're joking, aren't you? It's barely 11 o'clock. Can I borrow you for a minute? Borrow me? For what? I think I know where the would-be assassin might have vanished off to. That got his attention. Moments later, we were in the game room and I led Tanner to the left-hand wall. I was walking about the place and something was bothering me. Took me a while to realize what it was, but finally it came to me. It's bigger on the outside than the inside. What? I paced the room, I explained. The game room, wall to wall, side to side, is 18 paces long. Okay. But if you go out into the hall and pace the same distance, then it's 22 paces. Tanner frowned. They are thick walls, I suppose. I'm taking big steps. So? He hadn't seen the significance yet. There is a space 2, maybe 3 feet at this end of the game room that is unaccounted for. A secret passage? Tanner murmured. That's what I'm thinking. Is that possible? The look on Tanner's face was already giving me my answer. More than possible. This building has been inhabited by werewolves since well before the general amnesty. Back then, werewolves were in constant danger from vigilante bands hunting them down, and houses were built with escape routes factored in. They were called wolf holes, secret passages that led out of the property and emerged in some quiet street nearby. He shook his head. Of course we don't need them in this day and age, and most of them have just fallen into disuse, forgotten relics of a darker time. Well, darker time or not, right now it could save you and your brothers. Began to examine the wall. Come on, there must be a switch somewhere. Tanner joined me, running fingers across the carved wood paneling that lined the room. Something clicked and one of the panels swung open. Bingo! I used the torch on my phone to peer into the gloom beyond the panel. Double bingo! What is it? Asked Tanner, leaning over my shoulder. I pointed. On the wall was a clear handprint in dried blood. Now we know how the assassin got out of Ayre's house, I said. We just need to know where he went. You coming? Tanner smiled. Just let me put on some pants. Once Tanner was better dressed for exploring, we made our way through the narrow tunnel, Tanner struggling to negotiate his muscular form through. It was clear that the passage was not in regular use, but it was equally clear that it had been used by someone recently. Here and there we found the tail drops and smears of blood, from where King had clawed his assailant's hand. Let me go first, said Tanner, his appealingly low voice still more rumbling. In the enclosed confines of the tunnel. Because you're a man and I'm a weak, defenseless woman? I suggested. No, because there could be booby traps and my vision is better than yours. Especially in this light. I stood aside to let him go first and we carried on. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I placed a hand on Tanner's broad back as I followed him. It was a useful guide, but it was also comforting to feel his large, strong body like having a security blanket. I've always wanted to see one of these tunnels, commented Tanner. They're such an important part of werewolf history. We all know about them, but so few remain in this sort of condition. You must have known Ayre's house had one, I pointed out. Why didn't you look for it? It wasn't like it had been hard to find. Tanner shrugged. Werewolves investigation, you know. A werewolf's idea of finding a secret passage is to tear the house apart looking for it. The subject of investigation seemed to remind him of our earlier subject. I went to check in on Gray. He's all right. Still sleeping. The doctor thinks that's what's best for him. Apparently, he's not in any danger and werewolves heal fast. Hudson can fill you in on the specifics. Oh, don't worry, he will. I think that's probably why he's still in bed. He knows I'm downstairs waiting for him. Sometimes I think Father is right about us. I shook my head. No, you were right. Maybe he's right about some of the stuff you do, but he's not right about who you are. Thank you. I'm just parroting back what you already told me. Not for that. For Gray. I don't know what you did last night, but my guess is that I might not have two idiot brothers this morning if it weren't for you. And idiots though they may be, I would miss them. It was no problem. I didn't do much. Just a taxi service, really? From Hawkeye territory? Talk to Hudson. There was a brief silence from up ahead of me. Then Tanner spoke again. I have to ask. Why are you helping us? Are you complaining? Hell no. But when we asked for your help, you categorically refused to give it. Then a few days later you put your life on the line to save Gray and Hudson, and now you're in a dank tunnel under the city trying to prove our innocence in direct contradiction of the job you were hired to do. I'm not trying to prove your innocence, I corrected him. I'm just following where the evidence leads. Which is what we asked you to do and you said no. I don't like being coerced into things. Tanner nodded. I just thought it was because we were good in bed. Well, obviously that was part of it. Whatever the reason, thank you. We are grateful. The tunnel ended with an aluminum ladder propped against the wall leading up to a panel in the roof. Okay. I patted the ladder. That's proof that we are definitely not the first people down here since 1917. After you. Tanner climbed up and put his shoulder to the wood panel, which swung upwards. Heavier than it looks, he muttered as he squinted against the sunlight that filtered through. The panel fell heavily to the ground with a thump. It was backed with stone, so it looked like a paving slab. Where the hell are we? Asked Tanner as he hauled me out of the hole to join him. I breathed out in suppressed excitement. I'll tell you where we're not. Kenai territory. This is no man's land. The assassin was on his way home. To another pack's territory, Tanner finished the thought. I nodded. Perhaps it wasn't cast iron proof yet, but the evidence was adding up. The sons of Kenai King were not responsible for the assassination attempt. Chapter 10. My first instinct was to go to Kenai King, tell him what I had learned and get the guys off the hook, and that was probably what Tanner, Gray and Hudson would have wanted me to do. But on the walk back through the tunnel I began to think about things. If King believed as I did that one of the other packs was responsible, then that made this an official attempt at taking over the Kenai pack. That didn't call for an investigation, it called for war. I didn't want war, and I also didn't want to give up a mystery that I was just starting to get to grips with. I couldn't hold off telling King forever. That wouldn't be fair to the brothers, but I could keep digging and maybe get him a definite name. At least then all-out war might be avoided. Maybe. Besides, who was better placed than me to look into this matter? None of King's werewolves could cross the boundaries to investigate which of the other 3 packs might have been responsible, but a part wolf like me could. Really, I was doing him a favor by not telling him yet. How are you going to get an audience with the other pack leaders? Asked Tanner as we sipped coffee in the kitchen, a contrite-looking Hudson beside us. He and Tanner had had a frank conversation on our return, and I couldn't help feeling that Tanner had taken out a little of his anger at Gray, and his fear for his brother's safety, on the youngest of the Kenai heirs. That's where you come in, I replied. Us? Wondered Hudson. We can't even leave Kenai land. How the hell are we supposed to get you a meet with another pack leader? I was about to explain when the sound of footsteps on the stairs made us all turn, and moments later Kenai Gray entered. He held up a hand when his 2 brothers sprang to their feet to help him. I'm fine. I don't need help. Just breakfast. Hudson. Tanner jerked his head in the direction of the range. Don't see why I'm copping all the flack for this, muttered Hudson as he went to get more eggs and bacon. Once he's got his strength back, then I will kill him. There's something to look forward to, said Gray, taking a seat and casting a look in my direction. What's she doing here? She saved your life last night, I replied. Gray looked decently apologetic, though still sullen. I could forgive him for that easily enough now, knowing his story. Tanner then brought him up to speed with our morning's work, and he began to look at me differently, albeit reluctantly. Perhaps it was perverse, but I found myself really caring what Gray thought of me, and that change of expression to something approaching grudging admiration mattered a great deal. So what now? He asked. We were about to learn, Tanner replied. Miss Malone. I think you can call me Lana, I suggested. I had slept with 2 out of 3 of them. First name terms seemed the least I could offer. Lana, Tanner corrected, wants to go to talk to the other pack leaders. Which they're bound to like, Hudson put in. How? Asked Gray. Apparently with our help. Tanner turned back to me. I don't need you there in body, I explained, knowing that they could not cross borders without either breaking wolf lore or drawing a great deal of attention, which I did not want to do. I need something that says I'm on official Kenai business. A look of understanding passed across Tanner's face. He took a ring off of his finger and passed it to me. The Kenai seal. That the sort of thing you had in mind. I took the ring and smiled. Even with the Kenai seal to help getting in to see the city's pack leaders took some time and some phone calls, but a few days later I was heading west into Hawkeye territory. Hawkeye Jack was also known as One-Eye Jack, and not because he liked card games. He bore a resemblance to the Norse god Odin that he seemed to have decided to lean into, growing a straggly black beard shot with gray and wearing the long dark coat and broad-brimmed hat traditionally associated with the character. His pack lodge was less ostentatious than that of the Kenai, darker and more forbidding, as if the pack had deliberately set out to be the dark mirror of their wealthier neighbors. In the great hall, One-Eye Jack sat on a large leather swivel chair that had probably been made for a CEO, and yet attained the attributes of a throne when Jack sat on it. He peered at me through his one green eye, then took the ring. That I proffered. It had been enough to get me an audience, but would it be enough to get me some answers? Tanner, Hawkeye Jack asked, the first word he had said since I entered. They say he'll never be pack leader. I don't care about werewolf politics, I said. Unless they lead to assassination attempts. I decided not to beat about the bush. You've got no reason to like Kenai King. In reply, Hawkeye Jack reached for his eye patch and lifted it. I didn't flinch. As he revealed the mangled remains of his right eye, a claw mark that started on his forehead and ran almost to his chin, scything through his cheek, marred that side of his face and had gouged an ugly cleft through his eye socket. We were supposed to be at peace, he said as he replaced the patch. Like I said, no reason to like him. Jack shrugged. That's been true for a long time. Why would I start trying to kill him now? You said yourself. Word is that Tanner will never be pack leader. Some call that an opportunity. Hawkeye Jack nodded. Yes, some might. But those who go about that opportunity with assassins are cowards. Are you calling me a coward, Miss Malone? He leaned forward and I realized that this interview had taken an unfortunate turn. No, pack leader. When I face Kenai King, One-Eyed Jack's voice rasped with emotion, it will be in a duel one-on-one face-to-face, all fair and in front of witnesses. My pack may benefit from gaining his territory, but that's not what I want from that bastard. Without warning, he lunged forward and grabbed me by the throat, dragging me close to his face. I want his eye. Just when I thought he might kill me there and then, he let me go and I took a few faltering steps back. Takes a lot to rattle me, but that did it. Hawkeye Jack stood, drawing an end to our meeting. If you catch the one trying to kill him, you'd be doing me a favor. I want King for myself. He turned to go but then spun back, leveling a gnarled finger at me. And don't think I don't know that Gray has been in my territory. You tell him that if I catch him, then Kenai or not, King's son or not, I'll skin him alive. I had known that the wolf packs all had their personal style that stemmed from their pack leader, but you had to enter the pack lodges to really appreciate how differentiated they were. Arctic Venus was like a different species to Hawkeye Jack. She was currently the only female pack leader. Werewolves have their own version of equality. If you can kill everyone else, then you're in charge regardless of gender. Based on her pack lodge, she had decided to accentuate the difference. It was not that the place was done out in pink lace and heart-shaped throw pillows, but there was something feminine in the elegant minimalism that characterized the room into which I was brought. Venus sat behind a curved glass desk in a chair swathed in white silk. The whole room was decked out in sharply contrasting black and white, and the furniture and ornamentation was fluid and lithe, seemed to ape the forms of nature in hard glass, marble and plastics. The only noticeable splash of color in the room was Venus herself. In body shape she was as fluid and minimalist as her room, slim, elegant and sharp-featured, but the flowing dress she wore, which clung to her body and hooded her head, was a bright blood red. She watched my approach down the long room through narrow eyes and a starkly made-up face, perhaps trying to disguise the passage of years contrary to appearances. She was past 50, or perhaps simply to maintain an image. There was something iconic about Venus. Unlike her fellow pack leaders, she had assumed control of the Arctic pack at a young age, barely 15, and had established a style and image that she had scrupulously upheld ever since. To keep power for that long, against treachery from within and attacks from without, took someone as hard as nails. That was Arctic Venus. I had been scared of Hawkeye Jack when he grabbed me by the throat, but I was scared of Arctic Venus from the moment I walked into the room. You've been to see One-Eyed Jack already, she said after I had showed her the ring. Wednesday, I believe. I wasn't surprised that she knew. And I'll be going to see Mackenzie Shaw next. Of course. Does King know that you are visiting us? I wanted to say, I'll ask the questions, but how did you say that to someone like Venus? Why wouldn't he? I answered a question with a question. It's no secret that King has little love for his sons. It stands to reason that any assassination attempt is going to make him suspicious, and perhaps that would lead him to hiring a half-breed like yourself. Now you're showing Tanner's ring around. I never said I was working for King. Venus made an airy gesture with her perfectly manicured hand, which would still suggest that King doesn't know you are here. I wasn't in the mood to be played with. If this had been one of the male pack leaders, I would have stood up for myself, but something about Venus's very femininity undermined my confidence. I had to get it back. If you didn't want to see me, then you certainly didn't have to, so either you want to play a game with me, in which case I'd rather just leave. I have a busy day, or you want to talk to me, so can we get on with it? Why would I want to talk to you? Because you know something is going on in the Kenai family and you think that you can trick me into dropping something useful. Venus smiled thinly. Ask your questions. My turn to play some games. I don't have any questions. For the first time I think I surprised Venus. No. I shrug. What can I ask that you can't deny? Did you hire the assassin who attempted to kill Kenai King, and who we now know for certain came from outside Kenai territory? If there's a subtle way of asking that, then I can't think what it is. As I spoke, I never let my eyes leave Venus's face, looking for reactions. But if my words rattled her, then she hit it well. For certain, she parroted back at me. The Kenai heirs are no longer under suspicion. King must be pleased. She paused, pursing her scarlet lips. Or must he? Wonder if an excuse to have his sons killed would have been convenient. What do you think? I think you've got more reason to frame King's sons than he has. It was as good as an accusation, the sort of thing that had made Hawkeye Jack pretty mad. But Venus barely reacted. You know, of course, that King took a large chunk of my territory not long after I became pack leader. I hadn't known that. We became pack leaders of our respective packs at around the same time. Venus went on. He was about 15 years older than me, of course, and we had very different attitudes. I wanted to hold things together after my father's death, to show stability for the Arctic. King wanted to make a statement, which he made at the expense of my pack. Long time to hold a grudge, I noted. Similar to Jack, the question would be, why wait this long for revenge? Venus laughed. I don't hold a grudge for that. I don't hold grudges for anything. Vengeance is for the weak and stupid. I believe in the Arctic pack, its stability and its endurance. If I took revenge for every petty incursion, then we would be in fights with every pack, fights we could not win. My job is to keep the Arctic secure. Let the others bicker amongst themselves and we'll be there to pick up the pieces. Did that mean she would do it or she wouldn't? I was left genuinely unsure. Chapter 11. Getting an audience with the Mackenzie pack leader was even harder than the last two, though for different reasons. I couldn't just call someone to make an appointment because the Mackenzie didn't use phones. The Mackenzie pack were considered something of an anomaly amongst urban werewolf packs, though most of the packs had their origins out in the country. Back in the day, werewolves had thrived in the wide open spaces of wilderness. When they moved into the towns and cities, they had their rough edges rubbed off. Big, ugly wolves who lived in caves even when human and seldom, if ever, wore clothes suddenly moved into smart Park Avenue apartments, ate with a knife and fork and enjoyed a weekly game of squash with a man called Nigel. Was a pattern that had a lot in common with the process of immigrant assimilation. Within a generation or so, everyone was wearing Nike and eating Big Macs. But there were always a few holdouts, even in the heart of the city. The Mackenzie might not live in forests and attack unwary travelers, but they retained as much of their roots as they could in the modern world. Even knowing this, when I entered the great hall at the center of the Mackenzie Pack Lodge, I was still taken aback by the presence of a large fire in the middle of the room, its smoke rising to a hole in the raftered roof, far above. Back in medieval times, when werewolves first came to the notice of humanity, they used to say that fire was the only difference between werewolves and actual wolves. Normal wolves were scared of fire, as most animals are, but werewolves used it and were drawn to it like humans. Beyond the fire, on a seat of carved wood, sat Mackenzie Sean, pack leader of the Mackenzie and the youngest of the pack leaders in the city. His hair was a mass of thick, unwashed, dark brown curls, and he wore a fur cloak that hung off his rangy, muscular frame. As far as I could see, and I didn't look too closely, he was not wearing anything else, and I got the impression that he was only wearing the cloak now in deference to my presence. Similarly, the guards who flanked him wore only a tartan blanket, loosely wrapped about their bodies, the tartan a relic of the Mackenzie's Scottish origins. Sean held out a calloused hand and took Tanner's ring from me. He examined it a while, then tossed it back. All right then, what? You've heard about the attempted assassination of Kenai King? The Mackenzie were less interested in werewolf politics and news of other packs. Sean nodded. Everyone knows it was one of his sons, or all of his sons. Unless everyone is wrong, then his sons will be the ones who benefit. Unless everyone blames them, I suggested. Mackenzie Sean shrugged, the fur cloak rising and falling about him. That's a lot of unless. But if Kenai King had wanted a peaceful life, then he Shouldn't have spent it robbing others of their land. He's taken a fair bit off of the Mackenzie, I pointed out. Sean bared his teeth in a snarl. In my uncle's day. Still rankles, I would guess. You're trying to pin this assassination nonsense on me? I'm just talking. You've no love for King or his sons, I'm guessing. They looked down on the Mackenzie. That's no reason to start a war. I nodded, deciding to try a different tack. You're right. And a war the Mackenzie would have no hope of winning. If King and his sons were out of the picture, then it would be a straight shootout between Arctic and Hawkeye for who takes their territory. That makes you the only unbiased person I can ask about who you think might have taken that first step in trying to kill King. Hawkeye or Arctic? The rage flared across Sean's face. He probably knew that I was baiting him, but that didn't make him immune to it. The Mackenzie had an inferiority complex, tired of being seen as the runts of the litter simply because they lived more according to the old ways. You think we couldn't take the Kenai in a fair fight? His voice had a serrated edge like the blade of a saw. With or without King, with or without his worthless sons. Anytime. The Mackenzie may not be as large, but we're stronger, tougher, made hard by adversity. We don't sit around in our fancy houses on soft chairs eating fancy food. We are true wolves. And in a fight, no matter the odds, you always bet on the true wolf. Is that a fight you'd want to see? I asked, taking advantage of his anger. You bet it is. We tear them apart, and that's what they deserve. They've lorded it over us for too long. It's about time the Mackenzie took back what is rightfully ours and then took what's rightfully theirs for good measure. We're overdue for a war, and when it comes you'll find the Mackenzie the best prepared of all the packs. I thought that was probably true. So, King's death would be something you'd like to see? I pushed on. But Sean wasn't quite that unguarded. Yes, I'd like to see him die, him and his sons on my claws and teeth. But that's not what you're talking about, is it? You're not talking war, you're talking about putting King in the ground by assassination and his sons in jail by deceit. That would start the war, I pointed out. Sean shook his head. That's not war, that's politics. He spat the word out, as if it had no place in his mouth. You think what you like of the Mackenzie. Call us names everyone else does. You can call us savage, rough, uncouth. Say that we don't move with the times and are throwbacks to an age that doesn't exist anymore. And we are all that. But we're proud of it. Nothing is backdoor with the Mackenzie. Nothing is hidden. What you see is what you get. As he spoke that last sentence, Mackenzie Sean stood up from his wooden throne, his cloak hanging loosely from him, opening at the front to reveal more than I had wanted to see. His gaze now fixed on me. I don't like this sort of suggestion from anyone, least of all from some part wolf lackey of the Kenai. What gives you the right to come here and make these accusations? You think your powerful friends protect you? The only thing that's protecting you now is what you are. I'm not dirtying my claws with the blood of a filthy half-breed. There's no honor in that. Now get out. After I left the Mackenzie Pack Lodge, I went for a drink to think things over alone with my thoughts. Sean had been the most threatening of the three, but probably the least frightening, all bark and no bite. For all his big talk, I didn't think there was any way he would have killed me when I was carrying the ring of Kenai Tanner. For all he knew, I was an official emissary of the pack, and any attack on me was as good as a declaration of war, and I didn't think he was as ready for that as he claimed. On the other hand, with King dead and the Kenai caught up in a power struggle between the supporters of Tanner, Gray and Hudson, then Sean might well fancy his chances. Was that what would happen? For all their disagreements and fraternal squabbles, it did not strike me as likely that the brothers would fight against each other for the role of pack leader. But it would not be about which of them succeeded as pack leader, it would be about which of them was blamed for King's death. Power-hungry members of the Kenai court would see their chance and start pointing fingers, and soon there would be an internal war within the pack. They would be easy pickings for the Mackenzie, or for the Arctic. It had been difficult to get straight answers out of Venus, but her motive of revenge seemed to me stronger than any motive Sean had. She seemed the one most likely to carry out a covert attack and to get away with. But she also seemed the least likely to force the issue by taking steps. Venus had the power to wait, to bide her time rather than taking action. If I had to pick one who might be done waiting for King to die, then I would have picked Hawkeye Jack. He was impatient and his age only increased that impatience. He had arguably lost the most to the Kenai, an eye is no small thing. But as I sipped my drink, I had to admit that the bottom line was, they all had motives, they all hated King and his sons, they all wanted the territory. They all seemed to hate me as well, so the only thing I had accomplished that week was to make myself 3 new enemies. That should make life. Chapter 12. These same thoughts were processing through my head as I made my way home. Through the darkened streets. All that really seemed to have happened was that I had increased my total number of suspects from 3 to 6. They all had strong motives, they all had the opportunity, and yet there were arguments to be made against all of them as being responsible. It was starting to dawn on me that the main problem with solving the attempted murder of Kenai King was that the man himself collected enemies for fun. Everybody wanted to kill him, or at least had reason to. I had half a mind to go back to King and suggest that, rather than me continuing with the investigation, he should just try being nice to people for a change and the issue might take care of itself. To make matters worse, I was even starting to doubt myself where the brothers were concerned. All the pack leaders I had spoken to had been sure Tanner, Gray and Hudson, separately or together, had hired the assassin. That suspicion didn't come from nowhere. And while the pack leaders all had strong motives, personal, pack or both, they would likely still have to go through war to get what they wanted, while the brothers just inherited their reward. Still, I found it a lot easier to believe bad shit about Jack, Venus, and Sean than I did about Tanner, Gray, and Hudson. But was that just because I was developing strong feelings for the latter 3? The worries and ideas went around and around in my head like one of those vicious bicycles you hear about as I crossed out of Mackenzie territory and made my way through the no man's land that lay between it and Arctic streets. I stuck to no man's land, following Manver Street up in the direction of Kenai land and my home. I was tired from a long and frustrating day. I could almost feel my bed pulling me like a magnet. But my day wasn't over yet, and it wasn't about to get any easier. Out of the darkness jumped 3 men. I knew they were werewolves instantly, just from the way they moved, and I knew they weren't here to wish me a safe journey home because they were all wearing masks. For a heartbeat I froze, but no longer than that. One thing you learn quickly in my job is that turning and running is always the right thing to do. It may make you look like a coward or, if you have misinterpreted the situation, like a fucking idiot, but better to be an idiotic coward than a bold corpse. This is something you either learn quickly or not at all. It's not something that can be picked up through trial and error. I took to my heels faster than you could blink, and as I did I heard the communal growl behind me and knew that they had shifted form. I was now being pursued on foot by 3 werewolves who could outrun me like Usain Bolt racing a guinea pig. But as it turned out, they didn't have to catch me. Ahead, another 2 masked men stepped out to cut off my retreat. These ones stayed in human form so I could see the smug, cruel smiles on their faces. They were smiles that said this would not be a quick death. Some wolves like to play with their food. Automatically, my hand went for my shoulder holster. Not as impressive a weapon as the one I keep in my car, but a silver bullet is a silver bullet. But my hand found nothing. One thing you absolutely don't do when you are visiting the city's werewolf elite is carry a weapon. That's how you get shredded. On the other hand, it seemed I was going to get shredded anyway. Curse myself for deciding to walk rather than drive, but driving around the city in the day is pointless. You just get snarled up in traffic. What a stupid reason to die. With the wolves behind me and the unchanged werewolves in front, it didn't take me long to make my decision. I barreled into the 2 humans, head down, hard as I could, taking one of them by surprise as my skull went into his belly with the force of a battering ram, knocking the breath out of him. The second man grabbed me by the collar and I twisted round to bite his hand as hard as I could, drawing blood. He was even more shocked than the first man. Werewolves don't expect to be bitten by humans. It's supposed to be the other way around. My gran would have been proud of me. Distracted by the pain, the man let go of my collar and I wrenched free, grabbing him by the arm and hurling him into the path of the coming wolves. 2 of them tripped and I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I was off again as fast as my legs could stand, but I could hear the approaching feet behind me and the panting breath of my lupin pursuer. I screamed in pain as outstretched claws scored down my back, not deep enough to kill but easily enough to hurt. I tumbled to the ground, going ass overhead, banging my elbow to add to the general symphony of pain currently being played in my body. The werewolf roared down at me, terrorizing the poor vulnerable human. Go fuck yourself, I suggested. The werewolf pulled back with a look of animal surprise on its face, then chuckled throatily before growling to its friends, who were already hurrying over to where I lay. Desperately, I tried to struggle back to my feet, but a lazy sweep of a clawed hand took my legs out from under me, causing more howled laughter. They had all changed to wolves now, the masks suddenly incongruous on their elongated faces, and I was at their mercy. Any one of them could have killed me where I lay, but that was apparently not part of the game. I clenched my teeth against crying out as a claw was flicked against my bare cheek, instantly drawing blood. My jacket was ripped from me, baring my arms, and another pair of claws darted in to nick my skin. Still, I forced myself not to scream. I was going to die here, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction as well. These are the big bad wolves, are they? I muttered. 5 against 1? Guess you're pretty proud of yourselves. I don't know if it was because I spoke or just because they weren't having any luck in making me scream, but now one of them raised his paw to deliver the final blow. I closed my eyes. The growls that suddenly enveloped me were loud enough to split my eardrums, and my eyes started open to see 3 new werewolves attacking the 5 who had gone after me. I wasn't well acquainted with the Kenai airs in wolf form, and yet I recognized them straight away and my heart leaped at the sight. Wolf or human, they were magnificent. I had seen Hudson before as a wolf, when he was defending his brother, but it was still impressive to see him here now, in full battle mode. His golden hair flew about him. It was rare to see a completely blonde wolf as he leaped onto one of my attackers, his teeth flashing, his bright eyes fixed on his opponent, his claws tearing fur and flesh. Tanner too I had seen before, and in close-up when we had fought on our first meeting. Even beneath the thick, black hair and the clothes he still wore torn now by his change, I could see the phenomenal muscularity of his body, which he soon put to work. He delivered a ferocious backhand blow to one of my attackers, knocking the werewolf off its feet and sending it scurrying to the wall, whimpering and nursing its jaw. In the same movement, Tanner spun to face another of my attackers who flew at his jugular. Tanner caught the other wolf by the wrists, and for a moment they stood in standoff, roaring at one another, matching each other muscle for muscle. But soon enough, Tanner's strength told and he forced his adversary back, a look of fear starting to filter into the werewolf's eyes. Gray I had never seen as a wolf. He was as handsome an animal as his brothers, his dark brown hair shorter than that of Tanner or Hudson, his body thinner, his muscles more wiry but his strength no less. A wolf lashed out at him and he dodged, moving with speed and agility. His attacker tried again and this time Gray went underneath the blow, taking the other wolf to the ground, where the pair rolled about, horrid snarls echoing as they fought for the upper hand. My mind inevitably turned to Gray's recent injuries. He should have been in bed, not out here defending me, and yet he had felt this worth risking his life for. Despite myself, I couldn't help feeling special. Hudson hurled his second opponent against the wall, and the wolf scrambled back to its feet, returning to its human form as it did so, a sign of submission. In werewolves, like waving a white flag. He ran. There was a high-pitched whine, cut off by an unpleasant tearing, bubbling sound, and Gray stood up, his teeth and claws red with freshly spilled blood. I was pleased to note that none of it seemed to be his. Finally Tanner, his muscles bulging, lifted the last attacker into the air by his neck. The werewolf convulsed for a moment, and then hung still. Suddenly, the 3 wolves all looked up, as if they had heard something. In the mouth of an alleyway stood the wolf Hudson had been fighting, the one who had gotten away by changing into a human. He ran off as soon as he realized that he had been heard, but in that instant I had seen his face and he had been careless enough to take his mask off. Maybe that one clue would be enough to make this whole affair worthwhile, and perhaps that was what I had been waiting for. Either way, my body was done with being strong and brave. I passed out. When I came around, I found myself in a strange bed in a strange room. I leaned up to look around and shooting pains seared throughout my body, especially in my back, forcing me back to the mattress. From what I had seen of the room, I was pretty sure that I was in Ayers' house. So they had saved me and brought me home. Again I had to think that suggested they were not the ones who had tried to kill King. But again, they might just be trying to fool me, getting on my good side by helping me out. Raising that suspicion still further was the question of what the hell the guys were doing in that street in the first place. It could hardly have been a coincidence that they were there just when I needed them. Before I had a chance to contemplate this question further, the door opened, and Hudson walked in carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw me and beamed widely before calling back out the door. "Tanner. Gray. She's awake. She's woke up. She's..." He turned back to me. "Are you all right?" "As well as can be expected." "She's all right," he called back out the door, then hurried to my side, careful not to spill the glass of orange juice on the tray. "I thought you'd like some breakfast. I have orange juice, Danish fruit. I didn't make anything hot, because I didn't know you'd woken up and I didn't want the food to get cold while I was waiting for you to wake." "It's great," I reassured him. "Could you maybe help me up? My back feels like a werewolf scratched the shit out of it." "Funny you should say that," smiled Hudson. I winced as he reached behind me to help me up. He was rearranging the pillows so I could sit back as his brothers entered. The anxiety in their faces made me smile. Werewolves aren't good actors. They were genuinely worried about me. They cared. I took a long draught of orange juice, suddenly aware of just how dry my mouth was, and then looked up at the guys. "Okay, first things first, were you following me?" The three brothers exchanged guilty looks between them, seeming to pass the buck of who had to answer with their eyes, until Tanner manned up. "Short answer, yes." "Does the long answer explain why?" I asked. The guilty looks once again bounced between the heir's eyes, and this time it was Hudson who had the courage to step up. "I guess we were all maybe a little bit curious about your investigation. It is into us, after all, and we thought, why not?" I raised a disbelieving eyebrow. "You thought it was worth violating the territorial boundaries of all three of the other packs and risking the start of an international incident, by which I mean all-out war with the Kenai, at the center of a three-way shitstorm, because you were curious." More exchanged looks. "Yes," suggested Hudson, not very convincingly. "No." I shook my head. "Don't get me wrong, guys. I am very grateful that you were there, more grateful than I will ever be able to express. But that is not why you were following me. Or at least not the whole story. There is some stuff that you are not sharing, and I would appreciate it if you shared. We didn't trust you." It was not what I had wanted to hear, of course, but Gray's words were the most honest the brothers had spoken to me so far that morning. "Okay. We like you." Hudson, as ever, was there to take the edge off his brothers' statements. "We like you a lot, and, well, we thought that we might be letting that get in the way of our good sense. I mean, you were investigating us for attempted murder, and yet we were trusting you based on, well, not very much. It was a problem with which I could identify, having been thinking the same things myself about my believing in them. And then, rather than being cautious around you," Tanner continued, "I gave you the ability to go talk to the other pack leaders. No part wolf has that privilege. And I guess we started thinking maybe you set the whole thing up somehow. Maybe you took advantage of our father or of us. Maybe you wanted access to our enemies so you could sell them information or sell yourself as someone who could infiltrate the Kenai but had no loyalty to them. Maybe you'd been in collusion with one of the other packs from the start. We had a whole lot of maybes. Stuff you might have been up to. It just seemed like we'd taken a lot on faith," Hudson went on, "because we wanted to believe you. So we followed you," Gray concluded. "Can't have been easy," I said. "Werewolves don't cross territories. The truth is that most could get away with it if they were just popping across to the shops or something, and yet they don't. That instinct is etched into their DNA. You stick to your own ground." For the brothers, it was more than an instinctual boundary. They were very recognizable, and if caught they would have been in serious shit. Tanner shrugged. "If you have money, then all things are possible." He sighed. "Probably wasn't even worth it. It's not like we could get into the pack lodges. That would have been suicide. But it doesn't matter." He sat on the bed beside me and looked me in the eye. "We trust you. Not because you got tacked, but because we trust you. Sure, we met because you were investigating us, and it would be so easy for you to be using this to screw us over, but sometimes you have to put your faith in your instincts, and all our instincts say one thing. We trust you." "The feeling's mutual," I replied. "And like them, it wasn't because they had saved my life or because of anything I had learned about them or about the other potential suspects, it was simply that I trusted them. But if you were following me, then how come you took so long to help out when I got attacked? Heads were hung and feet shuffled until Hudson finally spoke. You know when you stopped for a drink? Yeah. So did we. Chapter 13. Like most active people, I suck at being ill or injured. Lying around in bed for days on end waiting to get better is just not for me. I need to be doing stuff all the time. I tried turning the case over and over in my mind, seeing if I could make some progress, but it just made my head hurt as much as the rest of me. As matters stood, I had nothing definite. I needed to be out there collecting evidence, not laid up here staring at the ceiling. Having the guys taking care of me was cool, and they made surprisingly good nurses, but my body was too beat up for me to take any more recreational advantage of staying with them. By day 4 I was feeling a lot better, but irritatingly, they all had some official ceremony at the Pack Lodge. Being a Kenai heir wasn't all fun and games. Fed up with lying in bed, I got up to have a proper nose about the room in which I had spent much of that week. It was clearly a spare room, not one inhabited by any of the brothers, and yet it looked as if someone had recently been using it as a makeshift office. There was a desk in the corner with a few pens scattered across it, and one of its drawers partly open with various papers sticking out, without touching anything, because as long as you don't touch, it's not snooping. I peered as far as I could into the drawer to take a closer look at the papers. They were covered in a scattering of erratic handwriting. I could barely read a few circled names in places. Most of the writing seemed to be stream of consciousness, making sense to the writer but to no one else. But one name leaped out at me: Yuko. The name of Gray's mate, who had been killed in the Hakai border raid. I stared at the bundle of notes, flaunting its secrets provocatively. Hudson had said something about Gray investigating the killing of his mate. Reams of notes, he had said. Was that what I was looking at? If it was, then it was none of my business. It had nothing to do with the King case, and I wanted to look at it more than anything else in the world. But I couldn't justify that intrusion into Gray's privacy. I turned away. Or could I? I turned back. Was it so cut and dry that this had nothing to do with the attempted assassination? It was another attack on the Kenai family, albeit a somewhat oblique one. Presumably, Gray spent time with Yuko at her home. Might the raiders have hoped to catch him there and kill him too? More to my current way of thinking, was it possible that whoever was trying to frame the brothers for the assassination had created a powerful motive for Gray by killing Yuko? When I thought about it like that, then it would have been irresponsible of me not to violate Gray's privacy. I grabbed the notes from the desk and carried them back to the bed. I then hurried across to the door and locked it. However much I had convinced myself that this was essential to the case, I might struggle to convince anyone else of it. The rest of the day I spent in bed, a pen clutched in my mouth to make my own notes where necessary, as I tried to understand Gray's desperate efforts. For a werewolf, he had been surprisingly thorough, which spoke volumes of his desire for vengeance. I doubted that there was a fact about the circumstances surrounding the raid that he had not found out. The problem was that all those facts were in no sort of order. The whole document was an ill-thought-out, haphazard mess of facts, rumors, ideas, and suppositions, all written down as they occurred to Gray. Nothing was linked up. On page 2 he mentioned an eye-witness account of a werewolf with a gray stripe on his head, and that description was repeated on page 27, making it a key piece of evidence. But Gray had failed to link the two thoughts. Werewolves just don't have organized minds. They think in straight lines. AB. For twisted thinking, then you need a human, or at least a three-quarter blend like me. Over the course of the afternoon, I read Gray's notes, marking those passages that went together. I then went back through again, this time putting the facts into a clear chronology of events, figuring out which witnesses were to be trusted, matching descriptions to addresses. Basically, this was my day job, only someone else had done the legwork for me, and by the time the brothers returned in the evening, I had a pretty good idea who was on the raiding party, which of the party had killed Yuko, and where that person lived, which left me with the question of what to do with that information. Telling Gray would surely result in him rushing back into Hakai territory with murder in mind. Keeping it to myself seemed a betrayal of someone who had saved my life. My musings on this were interrupted by a knock at the door. Just a second. I shoved the papers back into their drawer and then unlocked the door. You locked the door? asked Hudson, perplexed. Force of habit. I don't live in the best area of town. We wondered if you wanted to eat in your room, or come down and join us? I'll join you. Great. How was your day? I shrugged. Boring. Dinner was as much fun as I had come to expect from the guys. The more time we spent together, the more we seemed to enjoy each other's company. Even Gray was trying, though I still felt that sense of him keeping me at arm's length, not wanting to get too close, as if to do so was a betrayal of his lost love. He was, of course, the only one of the brothers I had not slept with, and I found myself idly wondering if I still might. I wanted to. However much I tried not to think it, I really wanted to. There was something compelling in his intensity, and even in his melancholy. Gray loved hard, and that was not such a bad trait. The fact that, in the drawer in my room, I might well have an answer to his troubles, or at least a way of laying that old ghost to rest, did needle at me through dinner, but I tried not to think about it. I still had the decision to make about what was best to do next. You look tired, Tanner observed as dinner ended. Thanks. I'm just saying. Could you not get any sleep today? I shrugged, trying to look innocent. I never had much luck at sleeping during the day. You should get some rest, said Hudson. It might have been my imagination, but I thought there might be a trace of disappointment in his voice, and that of Tanner too. Had they both hoped I might spend the night with them? That might have been awkward, unless they had hoped I might spend the night with both of them. Just the thought made an image of burning intensity flash through my mind's eye, but in the version I imagined it was not me with two brothers, but with all three of them. It was early morning when I awoke, the sun still not risen above the city. Turned over gingerly to go back to sleep. My wounds were healing quickly, one of the advantages of being a part wolf, but my back was still sore. As I moved, I noticed that my door was ajar. That was odd. I was sure that I had closed it the night before. I got up to close it, and my eyes were drawn to something that made my blood run cold. The desk drawer was open, the notes scattered to the floor. I ran over to rifle through the papers to see if my worst fears would be confirmed. They were. My own notes, the sheet with the name and address of Yuko's killer, were gone. I was dressed in seconds and running for the door. The chain of events seemed obvious. During the night, Gray had wanted his notes and crept into my room to get them. There he had seen my conclusions and had dropped the notes in shock, before stumbling out, too dazed or in too much of a hurry to even close the door. His next action seemed equally obvious, though I hoped I was wrong. He would head into Hawkeye territory to challenge Yuko's killer. Unless I could catch up and stop him. Perhaps I should have asked Tanner and Hudson for help, but given where I was going, that was just asking for more trouble. In cases of vengeance, a male revenging the death of his mate Wolflore could be flexible, but brothers coming across the boundary to help out was tantamount to an act of war. I had to do this alone. Fortunately, I remembered the address of Yuko's killer, and my car was still outside Air's house from when I had last gone looking for Gray and Hawkeye territory. Through the graying light of early morning, I drove like a demon, tires screeching on the asphalt as I barreled around corners, heading across town. Even at the stupid speeds I was going, the drive never felt longer, and as I approached the block where Yuko's killer lived, my heart sank. I could see a circle of bodies forming, a makeshift ring that was traditional for one of the oldest of werewolf customs, the duel. I slammed on the brakes and was leaping out of the car before it had fully come to a stop. Careless of safety, I elbowed my way through the crowd of amped-up werewolves hungry to see some blood spilled. Reaching the front row, I found myself staring out into the center of the circle, at the middle of which a fire burned, its flickering flames illuminating the leering faces of the spectators, as well as the two men who were stripping off their shirts, ready to fight. Werewolves heal fast, but Gray's body still bore the signs of his recent brush with death. He was not in peak condition for a fight, and one look at the other side of the ring told me that he needed to be. The name of the man who had killed Yuko was Reed Leon, and though I recognized him from pictures I had found in amongst Gray's haphazard investigation, those pictures had not done justice to the man. He was a foot taller than Gray, and his body, which was thickly haired, even in human form, was broad with muscle. He bore scars from past fights on his body and his face, and his nose had been broken at least once. While Gray looked taciturn and solemn, Leon was grinning smugly, as if this was just another Saturday night for him. A few drinks, a bit of dancing, and a fight to the death. My gaze shifted back to Gray. Leon clearly had the more brute strength, built like a steamroller, but Gray's strength seemed more animal, more visceral, more agile. His lean, corded muscles knotted about his wiry limbs, and the fire threw the ripped muscles of his abs into sharp relief. None of which meant he had a chance. A wolf may be a lean predator, but if you hit it with a bulldozer, then that's relatively meaningless. I tried to push forward, to go and tell Gray that this was foolhardy and that he would be better off giving his findings, my findings, to the police. The crowd stopped me, holding me back so I could not spoil their fun. I opened my mouth to shout to him, but no words came out. As Gray turned, I had caught the look in his eye. Perhaps I did not know the brothers that well, and Gray least of all, but I knew them well enough. That look in Gray's eye, a look of infinite sadness, wedded to a fine edge by an unquenchable anger, told me how much he needed this. It did not matter to him. If he lived or died, he had to have this fight. I settled back into the crowd, keen to see but also keen that Gray should not see me. I wondered if that desire for justice and vengeance might be the deciding factor. There did not seem to be any formal way of starting the fight. There was no one officiating beyond the judgment of the crowd, who would see that all was fair, and no one sounded a siren, blew a whistle, or dropped a flag. The two werewolves simply went from not fighting to fighting in a spontaneous instant. Gray coming to his toes, Leon starting to swing his brick-like fists. I winced as, having dodged the first two of Leon's swings, Gray was caught by the third, a blow hard enough to take him off his feet and send him tumbling to the ground, drawing a roar of approval from the strongly partisan audience. So nimble was Gray's recovery that his body seemed barely to touch the ground at all, as he rolled on his shoulder straight back into a standing position. Leon grinned, flexed his massive muscles, and shifted into wolf form. He had been a big human, he was a huge wolf lumbering on his sturdy back legs, his thick arms hanging heavy by his sides, almost long enough for the claws to brush the ground. He howled, then charged at Gray, who spun sideways with the agility of a dancer, shifting shape as he moved and slashing his claws across Leon's broad, hairy back. "Yes!" I cried, unable to help myself, and suffered the angry stares of every pair of eyes around me in the crowd. Some of them were probably noticing my part-wolf smell. I met their stares. "Fuck you. I'm here to see a fight." Leon threw back his head in a snarl of pain and rounded on Gray, hurling his bulk at the smaller wolf, but Gray moved fast, catching the massive arms and absorbing their bulky strength with his own. I saw the tendons standing out through his hair, his eyes almost red with effort, and then he was gone, suddenly pulling back and allowing Leon's force and weight to throw himself forward. Gray was the wilier fighter, able to use Leon's strength against him, able to back off when the situation called for it. But Leon was not a man to underestimate, and was one who did not like to be made a fool of. Fueled by his anger, he lashed out with his leg, catching Gray off guard and sending the Kenai air back, tripping over the fire, a bloody gash across his chest. My heart was in my mouth as he struggled to get back up again, burned and bloodied, but as I watched, new resolve seemed to flow into him, as if the face of Yuko had floated before his eyes. Now it was Gray's turn to act in anger, and Gray's anger was a formidable thing to see. It burned from him, it writhed in him like a living thing, and when he set it loose, it drove him on like a wild thing, snarling and hurling himself directly at Leon. Gray's claws rose and fell with vicious intent. Leon fought back, but suddenly it seemed that Gray was the stronger wolf, fueled by hate and long anticipation of this moment. He also seemed invincible, as if he did not even feel Leon's claws. I didn't think Gray was feeling much at that moment. The difference between the two was that Leon was now fighting to stay alive. Gray did not care, he was fighting only to kill, only to have his vengeance. As Gray's blows rained down on his torso, Leon let his guard down for an instant, and Kenai Gray seized his chance. Diving forward, Gray fastened his jaws to Leon's neck, and in one gory wrench of his head, he shredded the larger wolf's jugular with his teeth. Blood spurted forth, silencing the crowd. Gray backed off, limping, his breath coming in fitful wheezes, only now feeling the injuries that had been inflicted upon him. Leon remained on his feet, but seemed to be doing so more by force of habit than physical strength. As the blood gushed from his body, his movements were marionette-like, stilted and uncertain, his body slowly coming to terms with the fact that it was already dead. His collapse seemed to me to be in slow motion, toppling forwards and folding up in a crumpled heap, his fur matted with red blood that spread out from him in a pool. As I watched Leon's body change from wolf back to human. Werewolves never die in their wolf form. The last desperate act of their dying bodies is always to revert to humanity. It confirmed Gray as the victor. I looked at the crowd around me and wondered how they might take this. Gray shifted back into human form. His body bloodied but his head unbowed, his wounds apparently not as serious as the amount of blood suggested. He killed my mate. There was a murmur around the assembled viewers. Can anyone confirm this? Asked a voice. A number of other Hawkeye wolves spoke up to confirm it. They had been part of the same border raid, and yes, Leon had killed a female. Righteous vengeance, judged the first voice. You may pass back to your own territory unharmed, and this matter will be considered dead. Without another word, and with the entertainment apparently over, the crowd began to disperse. The fight had not gone how they might have wanted, but it was better than no fight at all, and no one seemed to have much liked Leon. Anyway, I stayed put watching Gray. He stood still as a statue apart from the rising and falling of his shoulders, his eyes on the bloody heap that had, until recently, been Reed Leon. He still did not look up as I walked over to him. I can't believe it's over. You must be pleased, though. A frown passed across his handsome features. I think I expected to die. To take him with me, but to die. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do now. Live, I suggested. He looked up, seeming to see me for the first time. What are you doing here? I came to stop the fight, I admitted. I decided not to try. Good call. He smiled. It may have been the first time I had seen him smile, and was certainly the first that I had seen him smile with such genuine happiness, almost serenity. Nothing's changed, and yet it all seems different. We drove back together. Most of the blood on him seemed to be Leon's, and he insisted that he had no need of a doctor. Gray sat in silence the entire journey, not angry or upset. A calm seemed to have settled across him. He almost looked puzzled. Every now and then I caught him shooting glances at me when he thought I wasn't looking. We arrived back at Ayre's house just as the sun was rising, and it was only then that Gray spoke. There's something I'd like to show you. He led me up through the house, up staircases I had never known existed, until we came out on the roof. There, the sunrise was framed by the buildings, creating a piercing shaft of orange light like a gateway to heaven. Gray and I sat down side by side to watch. We used to come here to watch the sun rise. Gray's voice was low but betrayed no sadness. I wanted to come here to say goodbye one last time. I looked at his face. He wasn't crying. He didn't really look sad. He had reached a point of clarity where Yuko was concerned. That was what this had given him, the ability to let go, and with the rising of the sun, the harsh pain of loss that had crippled him since Yuko's death would begin to heal. She was really something, he said. I wish I'd known her. I'm glad you didn't. Why? I frowned. He said nothing in reply. She's still gone. Why do I feel happy when she's still gone? I sighed. When we lose someone we love, that shadow never passes from us. You either live forever in the dark, or you learn to turn on the light. Good analogy. Thank you. It's what my mom told me when my gran died. I didn't mean for that, said Gray. I would never have found out who killed her. You found it out, I replied. I just gave you the name. Without you, I would never have been able to avenge her. I would never have been able to reach this place. Thank you. I didn't try to reject his thanks. It meant a lot to him to say it. It meant a lot to him that I knew how much it meant. I'm not sure I ever thanked you for saving me, for bringing me home. He smiled. Home. I'm glad you're calling it that. I hadn't even thought about it, but yes, Ayre's house, for all that I had been there only a matter of days, had started to feel oddly like home. I didn't have an unhappy upbringing, but finding a home away from home had always been difficult. My mixed ancestry had made it hard to fit in anywhere. Who would have thought that I might find a place to fit in at the heart of werewolf society? But it was only temporary. Well, while I'm looking into the case, I guess it's good to have a base of operations that's right at the heart of the Kenai. Is that all it is? I could feel his eyes on me. I said nothing, but my blush probably answered his question. I've been a jerk to you since you arrived. I shook my head. You haven't. I have. I've tried to be. I wanted to be. Why? Because I was attracted to you from the first moment I saw you. I haven't found another woman attractive since Yuko's death, and I tried everything I could to make you hate me so that maybe I could hate you. Now. He gazed at the rising sun. Now it's like a weight has been lifted by you, and when I look at you, all I can see is this beautiful, brave woman, and all I want to do. His words tapered off as we fell into a soft, gentle kiss, the early morning sun bathing us in its glow. Chapter 15. When breakfast was over, I went back to my room to shower. My room. I had thought it automatically, and I guess if I had been staying in a hotel, I would have called it my room as well. It didn't have to mean anything. But damn it, it did. I was increasingly thinking of it as my room, just as I was thinking of Ayre's house as my home, as Gray had pointed out. It all tied in with what Tanner had said when I walked into the kitchen. Welcome to the family. I'd smiled when he said it, and I had been glad to hear it, but the more I thought about it, did I want to be part of a werewolf family? And a family like the Kenai at that? I liked the guys very much, in fact, why pussyfoot around it? I was fast falling in love with them, but there was so much more to consider. Physically, we were obviously compatible, and we all enjoyed each other's company, but how long did that last when the novelty wore off? How long could it last? In my experience, relationships did not last long, not when I was involved. Besides, for how long could one woman be enough for these three males? If I was a werewolf, then the fact of them taking other mates as well as me would have been normal, but I was 3/4 human, and that part of me did not want to share, which was pretty selfish seeing that I was asking them to share, but the heart wants what it wants. Gray obviously had a track record of monogamy, but could he ever love me as he had loved Yuko? Hudson had said he was looking for his Yuko, but how long would he stick to that when the sexually precocious werewolf was confined to one woman whom he had to share? And as for Tanner, he was an alpha male who would one day in all likelihood be pack leader of the Kenai. That made him the most eligible of werewolf bachelors, expected to take many mates to secure his line. Why would a male like that content himself with a single part wolf? It was a lot to think about as I showered, and thinking about it probably would have taken up the rest of my day had I not come out to find a message on my phone. It was from Kenai King, informing me of an event that night at the Kenai Pack Lodge that I would be attending, in case of further attempts on his life. The man had yet to master the word please, but I would have wanted to be there either way. That said, circumstances had changed recently and I had some decisions to make. Obviously we'll be there, Tanner acknowledged, but will we be there with you? I say yes, grinned Hudson. Just for the look on the old man's face, it'd be worth doing. It would completely undermine Lana, pointed out Gray. Our father is a vengeful man, who would not be best pleased to see her coming in with 3 people he suspects of trying to kill him. And you're telling me you wouldn't want to see that look on his face? Of course I would, but that's not the point. None of it's the point, Tanner interrupted. All that matters is what Lana wants. He turned to me. Sorry. That's okay, I shrugged. And actually you're wrong. What matters is how it affects the case. The case. You're right, I continued. Me coming in with you guys is going to send King's blood pressure to the point where the assassin may not have to bother. And I may need a bodyguard of my own to get me through the evening. You've got 3, said Gray. But, I went on, the important thing is, what effect might it have on the real killer? The 3 brothers all looked thoughtful. The event tonight was a lunar eclipse, a huge deal in werewolf lore, and one of the very rare events at which packs put aside their enmity and all got together in one room. Theoretically, they took it in turns to host. In reality, the Kenai usually strong-armed their way into that prestigious position. It afforded a rare opportunity for me to gauge the reactions of the pack leaders to each other all in the same room, and gave me the chance to push their buttons and see what happened. The question is, I concluded, what way of us arriving is most likely to get some sort of reaction? If we go in together, then it'll get a reaction from Father, pointed out Hudson. You're just not letting that go, are you? Muttered Gray. After reflection, we reluctantly decided that, while going in together might provoke a useful reaction from the other pack leaders, and a hilarious one from King. It might also make them less likely to act. Whoever was behind the assassination attempt had to believe that they could pin the blame on the brothers. Better we went in separately so they felt safe. In the same dress I had worn last time I went to the Kenai Pack Lodge, and I arrived early. Miss Malone. I was met by King himself. Glad to see you here alone. I have been hearing some unwelcome rumors. I hope you don't listen to rumor, I said, knowing very well that he did. And I hope you don't think you can fuck with me, growled King. More to the point, I hope you don't think you can fuck my sons. One of them is trying to kill me. Of course. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, to tell him about the evidence I had. But suddenly that evidence didn't seem to amount to very much. Tonight was my chance. It seemed unlikely there would be an attempt with all the leaders in the room, but if I could see something that might give me a lead, then I would be one step closer to saving King and removing the guys from suspicion. Given there are only 3 suspects, King went on with acid in his voice, you're taking your sweet time about figuring out who is responsible. Are you any closer? I shook my head. Whoever hired the assassin left no trail. I'm working on the idea that the assassin came from outside Kenai territory. Possibly there's a link to another pack. Some sort of deal been done. This seemed to satisfy King, who was happy to believe that he was important enough for more than one person to want him dead. You'll keep your eyes open? Damn right. King grinned. I like you. If I were a younger man, that dress would already be on my floor. Part wolf or not. Hard to believe someone is trying to kill you, I commented. But King's grin just broadened. The party was larger than the last one I had attended, but a lot less fun was being had. As each pack retinue arrived, it was like someone had poured ice down the pants of the party spirit. Arctic Venus arrived with all the style I would have expected, making an entrance, smiling thinly at King before sweeping past him, her well-dressed entourage on her heels. Half an hour later, not wanting to do something as polite as be on time, Hawkeye Jack turned up with his people, looking as if they had come from a Game of Thrones costume party. One-Eyed Jack did not even acknowledge the other pack leaders as he entered. The most important arrivals as far as I was concerned were Tanner, Gray, and Hudson, who were late, I would guess, because of Hudson. They were as well attired as before, and their clothes seemed all the more beautiful to me. Now I knew what lay under them. I tried not to let my eyes linger on them, but made eye contact with Tanner. They would be keeping a close watch on proceedings as well. I sought out Venus and Jack to see if they had reacted to the heir's arrival, but Venus seemed not to care and Jack not to have noticed. Mackenzie Sean and his pack were the last to arrive, the Mackenzie not believing in such frivolities as clocks. They had put on clothes for the occasion but stuck with their rough, straight out of the wilderness look, which I froze, not quite believing what I saw. There, amongst the Mackenzie retinue, was one of the men who had attacked me, the one who had foolishly taken off his mask. Surely, he would not have been dumb enough to come here? And yet, the more I looked, the more sure I was that it was the same man. At the very least it warranted a word with him. I strode towards the Mackenzie, but as I moved, the man looked my way and a look of horrified recognition shot across his face. He didn't try to make excuses or claim it hadn't been him. He just turned to the door and ran. I broke out into a sprint, following him. Tanner. If the man changed form, then I would never be able to keep pace with him. I needed help. I heard a smash of crockery as Tanner dropped his plate, rushing toward me. More cries and shouts of alarm told me that Gray and Hudson were also on their way. What the hell is going on? The voice of Kenai King carried above the rising chaos in the room. The guard on the door, who had been pushed aside by the running man, now stepped out to stop me, but I sidestepped him, ducking past. A second later I heard the thump of Tanner going straight through him. I skidded to a halt in the entrance lobby, glancing this way and that. Which way did he go? The man on the door looked up, confused. Which way did he go? Tanner repeated, his voice thick with snarl. The doorman pointed to a staircase. Is there another way up? I asked Tanner. That way. Right. Me and you will follow. Gray. Hudson, try to cut him off. Where's he heading? Asked Hudson as I ran for the stairs. The roof. I couldn't know for certain, but it was what I would do. Inside the lodge he was trapped, but as a wolf he had the strength and agility to leap from building to building. As I reached the stairs, Tanner went past me, now in wolf form and running on all fours. He howled and I heard the answer from his brothers, echoing behind us. As we left the entrance lobby, guests were starting to spill in from the great hall, wondering what was going on. I could still hear King's voice in the background demanding that someone tell him what was happening. I was out of breath by the time I reached the top of the stairs, emerging out onto the roof of the lodge. In front of me I saw a werewolf running along the edge of the parapet with Tanner in pursuit. A door at the far end of the roof flew open and Hudson and Gray burst through, both in wolf form, growling ferociously. The running wolf nearly tripped over its paws trying to turn and ran instead for the edge. It made a huge attempt at the leap out across the street, aiming for the buildings opposite. Even without a good run up, it nearly made it, but its claws skittered on the brickwork as it fell just short and was left hanging from a parapet. Gray took a run up and launched himself across the distance, his muscles standing out like cables beneath his fur. He landed securely on the far side and stalked toward the dangling wolf, letting out a harsh bark at it. "We need him alive, Gray. We need him alive," I yelled. Gray raised his hairy shoulders in what might have been a wolfish shrug, got back onto his hind legs. Werewolves walk on their hind legs but run on all fours, and reached down. The stricken wolf grabbed the outstretched arm and Gray hauled him up, just as Tanner landed beside him to make sure there was no funny business. I peered off the top of the building to see the street outside Pack Lodge filling up with people, werewolves spilling out of the brightly lit front entrance, staring up at the buildings to see what was going on. Amongst them, I saw King, looking up at his sons, apprehending the Mackenzie wolf. He looked around at me, an expression of confusion on his features. I gave a nod and King's face changed into one of grim resolution. "Where's Sean? Where is Mackenzie, Sean? I want him held. He is bound by Wolf lore to answer for the attempted assassination of a pack leader." Chapter 18. I woke early. I had no idea why after the night before. I'd have said there was a decent chance of me never waking up again. Can you die from orgasms? I can confidently say not, because if you could, then I would have last night. We slept where we lay, cuddled together as a comfortable foursome. Wolves have no issues with sleeping naked, curled up together, why should they? And that was how I woke. I peered across the landscape of muscular flesh surrounding me. Even in sleep they look somehow alert, their strength undimmed, their sexuality as fiercely potent as when they were awake. Curious, I looked between Hudson's legs. No morning wood, I really must have exhausted him. If I were to wake one or any of them now and asked, then they would happily start again, and it would be as awesome as before my stomach turned flip-flops. Just thinking about it. But looking at them now, as gorgeous as they were, as impressive as they were, as powerfully sexual as I found them, that wasn't where my mind went. Looking at them now, all I felt was an overwhelming wave of love and affection so strong that it almost choked me. I could have cried for my love of them and for the thought that they loved me back. What had I done to deserve that sort of happiness? And was I really contemplating giving it away? I had woken to misgivings fluttering in my stomach, and I would not be able to resolve them here, surrounded by my mates. Gently I pried myself out from under and between limbs, careful not to wake any of them. Stealing out of my room, my clothes under my arm, I went along the corridor to use Tanner's shower, nodding a good morning to a maid as I went. Nothing seemed to surprise them. I turned the water up as hot as I could stand, hoping it might scald away the fresh memories of the night before that were making it so difficult to make an informed decision. It wasn't about the guys. Of course it wasn't. They were the best things that had ever happened to me in so many ways. The sex was beyond amazing, and the idea that I might have that in my life was certainly a bonus, but good sex will only get you so far. Amazing sex will get you a little further, but not much. If it had just been good or even amazing sex I was leaving behind, then I'd have gone back into the bedroom, had one more go just to be polite, and waved goodbye. But these guys had gotten under my skin and into my head and into my heart. They were special. They were different. They were brave and loyal and loving. They were the best-looking men I had ever seen and yet lacked any arrogance. They were generous and intelligent. Above all, they seemed to care about me no matter what. They accepted this simple, singular bond between us as something wonderful and unique. They wanted to be with me and no one else, which for a wolf was really saying something. But they were also the heirs apparent to the Kenai pack. Of course that might change according to the wishes of their father, but either way, if they took me as their mate, then I would be hated, they would be hated, and we all would be targets for violence. Look at the shit that had happened in the last month. Did I really want to be part of a society that treated death in so casual a manner? If I stayed with them, then that was my life. I thought I was pretty tough, but I didn't want to have to watch my back for the rest of my life, and I didn't want to cause them problems. I was part wolf, one way or another. That diluted the great line of the Kenai. If they took other mates with whom to breed, then it would probably be okay. But they didn't want that, and I didn't want that. Where did you go from there? Tonight would be the lunar hunt. A month since all this had started. The brothers would be there, and it was as good an opportunity as I was likely to get to make my excuses and go. I poured shampoo into my hand, and stopped, and stared. Fuck me. If it hadn't been for the coincidence of thinking of the lunar hunt just as I was looking at my hand, then I might never have thought of it. Perhaps I was mistaken, but as I recalled, Henry Lennox had had no scar on his hand as the attempted assassin of King must have had. I finished the shower quickly, dried quicker, pulled on clothes and hurried out, panic thoughts seething in my mind. Maybe I had made an error. I had other things on my mind. After all, it was quite possible that I had just missed the scar. The Kenai holding cells were beneath the pack lodge, accessed via a side entrance that led down to the basements. I found a female on reception. I need to see Henry Lennox. No one's allowed in. She had sniffed the air on my entry, recognizing me as a part wolf. My name is Lana Malone. If I go to the pack leader now, he will give me permission just before he has you turned inside out. Let me in. Fortunately, there was someone around who had been there last night and who recognized me and could verify that me and the pack leader were best buds. Was led down to the cells where Henry Lennox was still being kept for now, pending an investigation into his claim that he had been acting on orders. I need to see your hands, I said on entering. No time for small talk. My what? Your hands, show me your hands, palms out. The werewolf flicked a look at his jailer, who gave a shrug as if to say, part wolves be crazy. Lennox held out his hands. I flipped them over to look at the other side just to make sure. Not a scratch on them. Werewolves heal fast, of course, but a scratch like King had described would have left a scar. We had the wrong man. It was possible, of course, that Mackenzie Shawn had still been responsible and there had been another assassin, but that started to look pretty fucking shaky. When you realize that our only definite link to Shawn was the word of Henry Lennox, who was lying. He had attacked me, of course, but that didn't amount to shit. My gut told me that something more was going on, something I wasn't close to the bottom of yet. I trudged back up to ground level with my mind even more of a whirl than it had been when I went down. What now? I had to talk to King to tell him that he was still in danger, especially with the lunar hunt tonight. I needed to talk to the guys to tell them that someone was probably still trying to frame them. I also needed about half an hour of peace and quiet so I could think clearly about how this had been pulled off and who might have done it. Frankly, it would be nice if a great big fucking clue bashed me over the head. Then one did, and I fell to the ground unconscious. Chapter 19. The first thing I was aware of as I slowly drifted back into consciousness was pain. A sharp, persistent ache at the back of my head that was going nowhere. The next thing I was aware of was embarrassment. That sounds stupid, but I had been a private investigator all my adult life, only to be clobbered over the head in broad daylight. That's incredibly embarrassing. Had all my better instincts been sapped by sexual excess? Probably not. I'd just gotten careless and stupid, and there was a decent chance that I was going to pay for it. I tried to move my hands and found they only got so far before being forcibly yanked back with a metallic clatter. Peeling my eyes open, my fuzzy vision focused on chains about my wrists embedded in the wall. Great. Inch by inch, my body complaining all the way, I levered myself up into a kneeling position and paused there while the room spun unpleasantly around me. Good morning, Miss Malone. I started at the sound of the voice, which just made my head ache all the more. A blurred figure came into focus in the grim room in which I found myself, a werewolf in wolf form, their hair a gleaming white shot with gray, so it looked almost silver, while werewolf males quite like splitting their clothes open when they transform because it looks cool and means they can still have suits tailored to their human body despite the expense many females choose to have clothes made to accommodate the change and look equally good in either form. This one, I was sure, was equally well dressed in human or wolf shape, the red material having slits built into it to allow for the expanded wolf muscles, through which the silvery mane of Arctic Venus protruded. You really are part wolf, aren't you? She growled. So are you, I replied. I'd never met a wolf who could speak when changed. Before, there seemed no other explanation. Venus waved a hand. Distantly so. Not even a werewolf nose can pick up my humanity while you stink of it. But that ancestry does give me some advantages. You can talk in wolf form. Less used than you would think. More importantly, Venus explained, I can think. She smiled. It was not a comforting sight. Werewolves, you see, are very stupid. Hang around them and you start acting stupid too. You forget simple basic things because you just think wolves don't act like that. You assume loyalty in pack members and never think someone might have been paid off. In your case, even after you made the discovery that Lennox had been disloyal to his pack leader, you still didn't think to watch your back in Kenai territory. You had someone keeping an eye on me. I had every right to be embarrassed. I was a fucking moron. Of course. Wherever you went. Venus laughed. People are so obsessed with the idea that werewolves are loyal to the pack that they never even wonder. They never think about what bad habits we might have picked up from living amongst humans. Not to mention breeding with humans. In my case, my human ancestry gives me the advantages of disloyalty, deviousness, and cunning. In yours, your wolf ancestry has made you as dumb as a brick. That was hard to argue with at this moment. The original assassin? I asked. Even if I was going to die here, I wanted to know. Now she was one of mine, nodded Venus. For a job like that, I wanted an Arctic werewolf. There's no point in your looking to find the one with a scar on her hand. She died the night of the last lunar hunt, shortly after returning to Arctic territory. The price of failure, I guessed. Fear works a hell of a lot better than loyalty. The plan was to create chaos in the Kenai pack. Then you could move in? Venus nodded. The brothers are too close for them to fight amongst themselves, but if everyone had thought that one of them had King killed, then there would have been total chaos and I would be best placed to take advantage. Why not the other packs? Jack would be too busy raging because he wasn't the one to kill King, and Sean is all talk. You presumably guessed as much when you visited them. She smiled. And yet you still didn't guess it was me. Dumb as a brick. I agreed and meant it. You had me attacked on my way back home. You hired Lennox to attack me and accidentally show his face, then show up at the lunar eclipse party. A good insurance policy. What if they had killed me? I asked. Venus rolled her eyes. They were supposed to beat the hell out of you, make it look good, and then run off when the Kenai heirs arrived to save you. Didn't think those idiots would take that long. And then my wolves got a bit caught up in the fight. That's how it is with werewolves. Stupid. I suppose things will be different with you in charge? I suggested. Venus shook her head. Nope. I like things this way. Stupid people are easy to manipulate. Case in point. She indicated me. Thanks. And now you're going through with the same plan again. Venus shrugged, seamlessly changing form as she did so. It's a good plan. No point in throwing it out just because of one careless wolf. Someone more reliable will do the assassination this time. And I know he'll be more reliable because I showed him what happened to the first assassin. King will be killed, and without you to save them, those 3 idiot brothers will be completely helpless. Chaos reigns till you step in. She nodded. Exactly. I did tell you that I wanted what was best for the Arctic pack. Taking over the Kenai territory is what's best. Won't a whole lot of your wolves get killed in the process? I guess best is open to interpretation. You can't make an omelet without breaking skulls. I'm not sure that's the saying. Well, I'm not trying to make an omelet. She strolled over and placed a finger under my chin to tilt my face up to meet hers. You're probably wondering what happens to you now. I said nothing, but the question had crossed my mind. After your mates, yes, I know about that, to save their father's life last night, selling them as the assassins will be a little harder than before. I need some other event to make it plain that they can't be trusted. Everyone now knows that you were working for King, so after your mangled corpse is found in Heir's house, I think people will start asking questions. Should be enough to seal their guilt. But she strolled away again. To really sell the idea you need to die after King. These corners can be so accurate nowadays. I won't be able to do it myself, I'm afraid, but don't worry, one of my guards will tear you apart later. He's under orders to make it quick. After all, I'm not a monster. With that, she went out the door. Isn't it funny how a little humanity can make something as harmless as a werewolf into something truly terrible? With Venus gone, I was left alone with the two guards who stood on the door, their gaze fixed on me. One of those werewolves was going to kill me later. Was not something that I wanted to think about, but that sort of thing does unavoidably concentrate the mind. I tried to turn my attention to the manacles on my wrists. I'm not what you would call an expert at picking locks, but I had taught myself the basics because this is the sort of thing that can happen to a private investigator, especially in this town. Leave it. The warning growl came from one of the guards at the far end of the room. I know what you was just. You just do that again and you'll regret it. You're killing me later, I pointed out. How much worse can it really get? A leering grin spread across the faces of both guards, showing sharp fangs. It can get worse. Trust us. I left the manacles alone. There was no way they would let me finish picking the locks anyway. What now? I racked my brain for ideas. I've been in some tight spots before, with my life in danger, and I've always been able to get out of them using my wits. But I'd never been in quite as tight a situation as this before, and suddenly my wits didn't seem enough. Nothing was occurring, I couldn't see any way out. Short of some serious stroke of luck, I was going to die in this room. To try to take my mind off of this depressing fact, and in the vague hope that there might be some cause for optimism located elsewhere in the room, I turned my attention to my surroundings. You could have described the room as empty, except that it invited the word abandoned. The floor was presumably wood. Below the thick layer of dust that coated it, the walls were flaking plaster, augmented here and there by the tattered remains of wallpaper that had once adorned it. The door swung off its loose hinges at an angle that veered between drunken and suicidal, and the windows were broken. From the center of the ceiling hung a single bare light bulb that was on its last legs, providing only a sickly orange haze. As casually as I could, I tried to look out of the window, but one of the guards saw me and drew a sheet that might once have been called a curtain across it. We'll have none of that, neither. Nothing in the decor gave me any escape plans, and everything about the place suggested that it was not somewhere people were in the habit of dropping by, meaning I was unlikely to be discovered. But there was one thing that interested me. Cautiously, afraid of transgressing another rule, I turned my eyes to where my shackles were attached to the wall. It had occurred to me that if this place had been regularly used by the Arctic Pact to detain prisoners, then there would have been a lot less dust. More likely, therefore, this was just a convenient and quiet location, so why would such a place have shackles attached to the walls? Unless the previous occupants had enjoyed an active and unconventional sex life. My suspicions were confirmed as I saw that the bolts fastening my shackles to the wall were brand new, and a pile of plaster dust on the floor suggested that they had been added very recently, perhaps today. So what did that mean, and where did it get me? There was no way they would have brought me here rather than to a purpose-built prison if they had had a choice. Transporting a dead body to Ayers' house, even by cover of night, was not an easy task for a werewolf in enemy territory. The less distance over which you had to transport it, the better. Did that mean we were in Kenai territory? Perhaps near Ayers' house, if that was where my body was to be discovered. That made sense. If we had been in Arctic territory, then they could have kept me somewhere more suitable without worrying about being found out. Where this revelation got me was the knowledge that if I yelled out the window at a passing werewolf that I had been kidnapped by Arctic wolves trying to kill Kenai King, then they would be on my side. I would likely get killed, but still. Secondly, the more I looked at the wasted plaster on those cheaply built walls, the more I wondered how securely those bolts were holding my shackles in place. My strength didn't compare to that of a werewolf, but I kept in shape, and my part wolf nature gave me a bit of an edge on other humans in the strength stakes. If I were to really yank on those chains, then might they come out of the wall? They might. But, of course, I would only get one try. If I failed, then the guards would be on me, and then I didn't want to think about that. Though it had not yielded anything solid, this look about the room had gotten me thinking that maybe, just maybe, all these little observations might be made to come together in a plan. There was one more place to check for a possible escape route. Excuse me? I need the bathroom. The guards met my gaze with blank-faced disinterest. Don't let us stop you, said Guard 1. You're saying there isn't a bathroom? Guard 2 rolled his eyes. Of course there is. In the corridor. We're not animals. But you can't use it. Why not? What part of prisoner are you failing to understand? So I just sit here and wet myself? Then get killed. You know how to make it bad day worse. Guard 1 shrugged. Most people wet themselves when they're killed. Get it over with now and you can die with some dignity. I can't tell you how much better that makes me feel. Come on man, be cool. Guard 2 shook his head. We've never been cool. Kurt here listens to Abba. Hey, Abba will never not be cool, Guard 1 Kurt objected hotly. Will you at least turn around? I asked, wondering if maybe there was a way I could give the chains a test yank without them seeing. No. I'm chained to the wall. What do you think I'm going to do? Pee on the chains, said Kurt. So what's that going to do? I'm not a fucking alien. Guard 2 made a not my problem face. Well, be that as it may, the pack leader said we were not to look away from you for 1 second, so go ahead and do what you have to do. I'll hold it. I slumped back and glanced at my watch. It was now lunchtime. Members of the pack courts would be laying out their best clothes or watching their servants do it ready for tonight's hunt. In Arctic territory, Venus would be preparing to lead her pack in the monthly event, confident in the knowledge that her agent was in Kenai territory, ready to assassinate King. King himself would be getting ready, feeling safe and secure, knowing that his attempted assassin was under lock and key, and wondering if the Mackenzie territory might be up for grabs for criminals who thought they had successfully evaded the law, were preparing for a night out or a night in, not knowing that tonight they would be hunted and killed for what they had done. And 3 brothers. What were they doing now? How had they interpreted my vanishing off after last night? It doesn't look good when a woman does that sort of thing. If they asked around, they might find that I had been to the pack lodge that morning to see Lennox, but if the girl you slept with disappears before you wake up, do you ask around? Or do you keep it to yourself and pretend it was your decision and you never wanted to see her again anyway? Perhaps I was being too hard on them. I was confident in the love of Tanner, Gray and Hudson. I was confident that they would try to find me. But how? Had left no note to say where I was. Where could they start? They had no way of tracing me, and with only a few hours until the lunar hunt, the chances against them finding me seemed astronomical. It was early evening, following an afternoon of planning, replanning, and pleading to use the bathroom, that I reached an inevitable conclusion. If I was going to get out of this, then it would have to be by my own efforts. True, I would only get one chance at pulling the shackles from the plaster. But if I didn't at least try, then what the hell use was I? I might not be full werewolf, but I had enough of my gran in me to have the courage to do this. First up, I needed a distraction. My phone had been taken from me, but my purse was still in my pocket. I seldom carry a bag, I prefer to have my hands free. I took a deep breath and hurled it through the window. The purse had all my IDs in it, so if it was found by someone, then maybe, and it was a big maybe, they would put it in the hands of the right authorities. The guards stared at the window in disbelief, torn between running out after my purse and following their orders. As they stared, momentarily dumbfounded, I sprang to my feet and, throwing all of my weight and all of my strength into the effort, I yanked on my chains. For a second I could almost feel my gran in her wolf form helping me, pulling with me, urging me on. The bolt sprung from the wall in a shower of aged plaster dust. I seemed to have brought half the wall with me, but I was free. By now the guards were rushing towards me, and I swung my chain around as hard as I could, using the heavy end like a medieval weapon. The metal plate, bolts, and a large lump of plaster impacted with a satisfying sound into the face of Guard 1 as he rushed at me. He was mid-changed as he hit the floor, his mouth filled with blood, as I had caught him nicely under the chin. Next time perhaps he would let a girl use the damn bathroom. I swung the chain again, but Guard 2 was too close and I couldn't build up the same momentum. He grabbed the chain itself and I screamed as he wrenched on it, pulling me towards him, the manacles cutting into my wrists. He changed into his wolf form as I was pulled up against him, his breath hot on my face, his clawed hand closing on my throat. With his other hand he grabbed my wrist to look at my watch, and from the look in his eyes I knew what he was thinking. Close enough. He was going to kill me now. I felt the grip tighten on my neck, claws digging into my skin. I kicked at him and lashed out with my arms, but the blows felt weak against his thick hide, and they became weaker as his grip cut off my oxygen and the world turned red. Suddenly, the door exploded in a shower of splinters, and in the empty frame stood Gray, snarling, his brown hair bristling across his body. The guard dropped me to the floor where I lay choking and trying to breathe and gulp, both at the same time. The guard squared off against Gray, but then the Kenai heir was joined by Hudson and Tanner, looming behind their brother. The guard seemed to realize that, however terrible the wrath of Arctic Venus might be, that was theoretical, while a fatal ass-kicking from the Kenai brothers was very much here and now. He fled, crashing out the window. I stared at my three handsome saviors as they changed back into human form and rushed to me. Are you okay? Are you all right? Did they hurt you? Here's your purse. I took the purse from Tanner and looked wide-eyed at him. You found it. It hit Hudson in the head. I'm fine, said Hudson. What the hell were the odds of that? I can't believe you were out there. We tracked you, said Gray. How? Werewolves have a great sense of smell, but it's not that good, not usually. Tanner smiled at me. You're our mate. We'll always find you. I hugged them all, feeling the tears rising in my eyes. How wonderful to be so. Love that you stand out in a city of millions. But we didn't have time for emotional reunions. The moon was rising and the hunt would be underway. As I spoke, I frisked the still prone and faintly groaning Kurt, found a set of keys and unlocked my manacles. We have to move. It's Arctic Venus. She's the one who did all this, and she's got another assassin ready to kill King at the lunar hunt tonight. Damn it, Tanner spat angrily. The hunt is all the way across town. They left early. You go, I urged. I'll catch up. What are you going to do? Asked Hudson. I gotta use the bathroom. Chapter 20. The abandoned house in which Venus had kept me was, as I had surmised, not far from Air's house, and I was able to run there to pick up my car before setting off into the night. As I sped along, I caught occasional glimpses in the shadows or across the rooftops of my mates running to save their father. Even at this remove, I could see the effort in their lupin faces, the strain of their muscles as they taxed every sinew, racing for all they were worth. In the distance, drifting on the wind through the night, I heard the sound of the howl. On the night of the full moon, that howl could have come from any of the packs, but my gut told me that was the Kenai. On the bright side, we could use that sound to track them down now they were on the move, but it also meant that the hunt was underway, and that meant that King was already in danger. The brothers heard it too, and I saw them speed up, pushing themselves even harder. I tried to keep track of where we were, but at this speed and with my mind in turmoil, even I was struggling to figure where we might be going. I took a few wrong turns and plowed down a few streets I shouldn't, to the accompaniment of angry horns from other drivers, who had every right to be pissed at me. Thankfully, the streets were relatively clear, as most humans preferred to have a night in on the full moon. You saw some nasty stuff. The howl sounded again, louder now. We were closing in. If only we could get there in time. Then, up ahead, I saw the churning mass of werewolf bodies, closing in for the kill. This was the point when King had been attacked before. I jumped on the brakes, making the tires scream, then leaped out, yelling but struggling to be heard above the growls of the pack. Before I could reach them, I saw Tanner spring down from the darkness, snarling angrily and tackling his father to the ground. He was trying to keep King safe, of course, but his actions were misinterpreted by the rest of the pack. He's trying to help, I screamed at the top of my lungs as the Kenai pack court turned on King's immediate heir. But even if they could hear me, they weren't about to listen to a part wolf. But suddenly, Tanner was not alone. Hudson and Gray leaped to his aid, fighting back any who came near, and aiding Tanner in keeping their father safe. They were outnumbered 3-1, but odds did not matter to them. They held their ground, snapping and slashing at any who dared come close. At this point, they had no idea who could be trusted. They were not letting anyone get near King. A series of snarls, barks, and growls went back and forth as the brothers tried to explain what they were doing. Werewolves do have a language of their own, but it is very simplistic, communicating basic ideas like enemy, food, hump. It was certainly not enough to communicate a complex conspiracy, but hopefully it was enough to say, he's in danger, you jackasses, back the fuck off. I assumed it was, as the other wolves now backed off a little, though still suspicious and growling. As I watched, I saw one wolf at the edge of the group, backing off further, allowing himself to be swallowed into the darkness of an alley. Hey! I hurried forward to get a better look down the alley and saw the wolf was now running at high speed away from the scene. Hey! If the pack court had not noticed my presence, then my mates immediately picked up on the sound of my voice, and their heads instantly turned to look at me. He's getting away. Who's getting away? The voice was that of Kenai King, the only wolf with the self-control to go against his natural instincts and change in the heat of the hunt. The assassin. It was Arctic Venus. She hired Hendry Lennox to put us on the wrong scent and got someone else to try and kill you tonight. That was all King needed to hear. His icy eyes turned to the alley as he roared a command at his pack. The hunt continues. The end of the word was lost in snarl as he shifted back to Wolf and the pack took off down the alley led by Tanner, Gray and Hudson, and with me trailing along at the end. I couldn't follow by car, and I sure as shit wasn't letting this play out without me there, so I ran with the wolves. I felt the blood of my werewolf ancestors coursing through my veins as I struggled to keep up. My heart pounded with exhilaration, connecting with some primal urge to hunt that I had kept suppressed all these years. Damn, but it felt good. I watched a pair of humans out on an ill-advised full moon date, jumping out of the way as we thundered past, hot on the trail of our prey. But even as we ran, a thread of uncertainty found its way into me that would not be troubling the wolves. I could see where we were heading for Arctic territory, which made sense, of course. The assassin was heading for home. But what happened when the pack court of the Kenai reached the boundary of Arctic territory? Were they going to stop? It didn't look like it to me. We entered no man's land without even slowing, and hit Arctic territory soon after, with our quarry not far ahead. Cries went up from around us from Arctic wolves, assuming this was an invasion. It would only be a matter of time before Venus showed up with her own pack court, and then war. With a snarl of triumph, I saw Tanner leap and bring down the would-be assassin. He was joined by his father, while Gray and Hudson led the pack in a howl of victory. I just stood there, hands on my hips, trying to catch my breath, feeling lightheaded after the run. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew it was going to happen soon, and it was going to be bad. Another howl ripped through the night, but this one was aggressive and fierce. And it wasn't the Kenai. Seconds later, another pack tore out of the shadows. The Arctic did not pause or ask for explanations, they simply attacked, leaping for the jugulars of the intruders. The Kenai fought back with equal violence. In the thick of the fight, I saw my mates Tanner, Gray and Hudson, all fighting ferociously. I had seen them fight before, of course, but that had been different. That had been for their lives or for mine. This was too in its way, but it seemed to me that this was at best a misunderstanding and at worst an act of conquest by both packs. King had made his enemies, and so Venus had turned on him, and when King fought back, it started a war. What the hell way was that to run a world? I didn't want my mates to be any part of it, and I knew that in their hearts they didn't want to be part of it. They had more brains than that, more heart. But could they go against their instinct, their tradition, everything they were? To my shock, it turned out that they could. As I watched, I saw Tanner trying to push Kenai wolves back, then rounding on the Arctic attackers, and rather than fighting, barking at them, trying to calm the situation. He was quickly joined by Gray and Hudson, trying to glean some space between the two fighting packs, as both the Arctic and their own werewolves snarled at them. My heart swelled to see them trying, but sank again to see it was not just a losing battle, but a dangerous one. When Tanner tried to urge his own pack to retreat, he turned his back on the Arctic, and a wolf slashed its claws across his broad back. When Hudson tried to help, a pair of Kenai wolves ran at him, treating him like a traitor. Gray, meanwhile, was caught in a pincer between Kenai and Arctic, his nose bloodied, limping on one leg. They were going to die trying to stop a war that seemed doomed to happen one way or the other. I couldn't let this happen, but what the hell did a wolf private detective do to stop a werewolf war? Stop the fuck fighting and sit the fuck down. I surprised myself with how loud I could yell if I wanted. The werewolves of both sides stopped what they were doing and stared up at me in dismay. I think it was more disbelief that a part wolf was telling them what to do that had stopped them than anything else, but it would do. Arctic Venus. My eyes sought out the silver wolf in the middle. It's over. No response. The attempted assassination on Kenai King was orchestrated by Arctic Venus. I addressed the Arctic pack, contrary to werewolf lore, whether she has the courage to admit it or not. And the proof is, well, that bloody smear on the street there, I think can still be identified as one of your own. He is. They were starting to change back to human now. It was a good sign. It meant they wanted to say what you liked about wolves. They were generally honest. That was one of the things Venus despised about them. I saw Tanner, Gray and Hudson looking up at me. They were all hurt, but I could still see the pride in their eyes, and it gave me strength. He tried to kill Kenai King tonight, on Venus's orders. We followed him. Caught him, maybe got a bit carried away, but that's no reason this has to end in more bloodshed. I heard a few dissenting growls from those who clearly thought bloodshed was the way to go. What we do here tonight, what you choose to do here tonight, will determine the history of werewolves for generations to come. Your children and grandchildren as yet unborn stand in judgment on you. Don't let the ambitions of an evil woman. I looked at Venus, and the territorial lust of a vain old man. I saw King grit his teeth, lead these two packs into war. It's not. Chapter 2. His jaw stiffened, but he only nodded in response. He looked like Cora did, his expression somewhere between sadness and anger. But I knew this trial had only just begun. Pleading guilty was the start of it. They were going to make an example out of me whether I liked it or not. Commence questioning. My father waved his hand and slumped back in his seat, as though he couldn't quite believe what was happening. A man stood up next to him. I recognized him as Rand Charles, who had been one of the many to teach me the history of shifting over my years in the clan, and came down the steps towards me. The makeshift courtroom was still deathly quiet, like a grave, save for the sound of his footsteps echoing off the stone walls around us. He finally arrived in the box with me, pausing next to me for a moment and looking into my eyes before he spoke. There was no hint of apology or sadness at what he was about to do. I imagined that, like the rest of them, he really believed I deserved this. Maybe I did. So you plead guilty to releasing one of our political enemies, is that correct? He asked, a sneer audible in his voice. I met his gaze steadily, letting him know that I wasn't going to let him intimidate or humiliate me. I do, I replied, and there was another flurry of whispering around the court. What had they expected me to say? They all knew what I was here for, what I had done, and I would do it all again in an instant if it meant sparing the life of an innocent child. A McLaren, no less? Rand continued. I nodded again. That is correct. The man looked away from me and shook his head in something that looked like disgust, and I fought the urge to lean forward and slap that expression off his face. How dare he pull that face at the thought of a boy? James McLaren was a child. A child. That was the thought I hadn't been able to shake from my head ever since we took him hostage. I knew that the feuds with the McLarens went back further than I could ever really know or understand, but that didn't mean that we were required to abuse their child folk just to make things right. I couldn't imagine anything as foul as stealing that kid and using him as a pawn in a political game. James was 12, maybe 13, and every time I saw him being moved from one cell to another, I could see the terror etched on his face. He truly believed that he was going to die here. He looked so very young, so very childlike. I wondered if he had so much as had his first shift yet, if he would ever experience that after we were done with him, but I could at least pretend it wasn't happening as long as I knew he was unharmed. Many of the others in my pack felt as uncomfortable about having him as I did, but they also knew that the son of the clan's chief would give us the political leverage that we needed to move this stupid land feud along. He had been safe, scared until it happened. I wasn't on the inside of the political machinations of the clan, no matter how much I tried to convince my father that I should have been, but even I was unable to avoid the stories that sprung from the latest delivery from the McLarens. I supposed my father had an inkling as to what it was when it arrived. Small sturdy wooden box that was delivered by hand and left outside the walls of the keep. I had a bad feeling about it as soon as I saw it being whisked away and into my father's quarters. Call it a sixth sense, but there was blood in that box, metaphorically and maybe literally. I made sure I was nearby when it was delivered, and while I didn't see what was inside, the rumors moved fast in a community like this one, and it didn't take long for me to figure it out. A head. Not just a head. The head of one of our finest men named Ansel. He had been one of my father's closest companions growing up, and I suppose the McLarens must have known that, because they swiped him when he was out for a run one evening and had held him hostage ever since. I could still remember the look on my father's face when he came crashing out of his living quarters. I couldn't tell whether he was more angry or devastated, but I knew that whatever he had seen in there had changed him profoundly and for good. He had seen a lot of violence in his time, who among us had not? But the head of his best friend delivered to him in a box like some kind of twisted gift was something else entirely. It was hideous. It was monstrous. It was the kind of statement that a man like my father couldn't ignore or take lightly. He had to do something about it. And his advisors were all too happy to point him in the direction of the boy we still had in captivity. I listened in at the door to find out what they were going to do to him as soon as I gleaned that his name had been thrown around as a potential way to wreak revenge on the people who had done this to Ansel. I felt my heart clench with terror at the thought. I couldn't allow them to do that, not to some innocent child. Yes, he was part of their clan, but he was too young to know anything, to have done anything. If we let him go now, perhaps he would show us leniency in the future. Perhaps it was a way for us to begin to rebuild something between the two clans once more. But I knew they would never listen to me. I needed to free James myself, and I needed to do it before they could commit the same hideous act on him that their enemies had committed against our friend Ansel. I suppose Cora may have guessed what was on my mind, since she seemed keen to dissuade me from whatever it was I was leaning towards. "You won't do anything stupid, will you?" she asked me as we returned from a run one evening. "You won't get yourself into trouble?" "Of course not." I lied to her, knowing that I was being untruthful, but unwilling to implicate her in my plan. I knew I would be punished for it, and harshly, but I had to release that boy. The thought of a child as small and slight as he was being beheaded just to make a point was too much to bear. Could look the other way on a lot of the shit that had gone down as part of this ridiculous war, but that was a step too far, even for me. I needed to put a stop to it. It was the only thing I could do to live with myself in clear conscience. I snuck to his cell in the middle of the night, pulled back the grate, and left the door open for him. I made sure he did not see me at work, in the vain hopes that I might get away with this kind of action, but someone must have. For a mere day later I was cast into the very same cell myself and left to rot. But I knew the child was safe. I had watched him, hurrying up to my room at the top of one of the towers of the keep, and keeping a careful eye on him as he fled from his cell in the dead of night and into the woods, no doubt back to his family and friends, the ones who could keep him safe. As soon as he was gone, I felt something tighten in my chest as I realized that I may have given up my freedom for a boy who probably hated me and my family. Had it been worth it? "And you dare sit here in front of the entire clan and not show a single jot of remorse?" he demanded, gesturing up to the crowds around us and shaking his head at my apparent insolence. "You must understand how betrayed we all feel by your choice, Ariana." "I do." I lowered my head and closed my eyes for a moment, so aware of all the gazes bearing down on me. "Can you at least offer the people here an apology for your actions? For the actions that endangered the well-being of the entire clan?" I met his gaze as steadily as I could, and knew in my heart that I should just apologize. Maybe things would be different if I told them I recognized what I'd done was wrong and told them I would take it back if I could. Maybe I would get an ounce of the leniency that I so desperately craved. But I knew that what I had done wasn't wrong. Two wrongs didn't make a right, no matter how badly they wanted to believe otherwise. I kept my mouth firmly shut, and the longer my silence went on, the deeper it seemed to weigh on everyone in the room. The place filled with whispers, and I didn't dare look around, knowing that they probably hated me even more now that I had refused to answer. But I knew I had to say something. "I'm sorry if I put any of you in danger," I began, my voice filling the room and flattening the rest of the noise around me. But he was a child, a victim of this war as much as any of us, and I couldn't in good faith let him die for. I would do it again if I had to. I glanced up at my father and saw his face crumple at once. It was just for the briefest second, but it was enough for me to know that he had prayed with all his heart that I would offer him something that he could base my reprieve on. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. I had to stand by what I had done and would do. So another 1,000 times should I have to. He drew himself to his feet and held his hand up, and the room silenced itself once more. I sentence the accused to exile, he announced, not meeting my gaze. The word took a second to settle into my head. Exile? I had assumed death was the only punishment for what I'd done, but exile was worse. Exile was the cruelest thing he could have done to me or anyone in this room, and the flurry of gasps that followed his announcement let me know that I wasn't the only one who felt that way. My entire world had shifted on its axis, my life turning upside down in a moment. I couldn't leave the clan. It was all I had ever had, all I knew. The sentence is effective immediately, he continued, forcing himself to look away from me, as though meeting my gaze would have been too much to bear, even for him. Even after everything he'd done, he knew that what he was doing to me, now doing to his own daughter, was darker than all of it. I felt 2 sets of hands on my arms dragging me backwards, and for the first time I actually began to put up a fight. My words were trapped in my throat, but that didn't matter. I threw elbows, kicking my legs up, trying to scramble and wriggle out of their control. I wouldn't stand for this. Couldn't. No. I yelled up to him. Please don't dash. But before I could finish what I was saying, I was being dragged from the hall and out into the courtyard. I passed Cora as I went, and her eyes were wide as they met mine. She was as stunned by my sentence as I was, that much was clear. The air was cold and crisp, but now felt frozen and intimidating instead of welcoming and fresh. I was being led to the gates that led to a world outside this clan, a world that I never thought I would have to face. Without their backing, I turned to one of the guards on my arm, a man around my age. Don't do this. I don't have a choice, he replied, but I could hear the regret in his voice, like he knew how much this must be hurting me. I could hardly blame him. The punishment would be at least as severe as my own if he dared disobey orders from on high. My head sank to my chest as they scraped the gate open, and then heaved me over the threshold. As soon as the gate closed behind them, I felt it. I had heard tell of it before that moment, but had never really thought that I would have to face something so unthinkable. A severing, that was the best way to describe it. After all those years in the clan, all those bonds I'd formed were cut off at once. It felt as though I had been cast adrift, every connection I'd made over the last 22 years ripped out from beneath me just like that. I wondered briefly if it hurt them too, but soon the pain overwhelmed me, the weight of what had just happened bearing down on me, and I fell to my knees in the snow, dropping the pack that they had given me to keep me alive to the ground next to me. Tilting my head back and letting out a long, low howl, I felt it happen, that familiar tug at the bottom of my stomach. Before I knew it, I had shifted, vanishing into a form that couldn't feel the intensity of the agony of leaving behind everything I had ever known.